So good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. Good to see lots of people already chatting in the chat, saying hello and where they're from. Also, we've got someone watching from Rome. Good morning. And people all across the UK, which is great to see. Lovely. Hope you've all got a lovely sunny day, although you don't really want to be inside on a sunny day, but especially at this time of year. But of course, we will only take up a few hours of your time this morning. Hopefully be very interesting use of your time, and you can get out into the sunshine later on. So I'm Richard Fox. I'm going to be chairing this year's online UK Butterfly Recorders meeting. Just a few bits of sort of housekeeping. So at the bottom of your screen, the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll find the chat box, which is, as I mentioned, is already up and running. Feel free to put little messages in there, say hello, where you're from, that kind of thing, and anything you want to chip in as the meeting goes on. If you want to ask a question of one of the speakers, assuming that there is time in the programme for them to answer questions, then use the Q&A box, please, for that, not the chat. We won't spot your questions for speakers if you put them into the general chat. So use that Q&A box if you have a question. And as I say, if there's time at the end of a particular speaker's talk for questions, then I will dig those questions out from the Q&A and put them to the speaker. Okay, so I think that's probably it in terms of housekeeping. The meeting is being recorded, as I'm sure you were alerted as you entered the meeting. There are subtitles available, as you can probably also see from a message at the top of your Zoom screen. And so we better get on, really. So I'm delighted to first welcome to the virtual stage, to the screen, Russell Hobson, our Director of Evidence, to give you a welcome for the day. Russell.
Yes, good morning, everybody. And thank you for giving up what is certainly a lovely day for me down here in Swansea in South Wales. After this has just been a fantastic week of weather, so I hope you managed to get out, and it certainly seems to have put spring into hyperdrive in my garden, looking at the activity of the sparrows over the past week. I've also had a great chance when I was in Bristol last weekend at the Arnos Vale Cemetery. I saw loads of brimstones, which was just fabulous. It was really uplifting after what's been a pretty grim winter, really. So yeah, fantastic thing. And certainly it's been quite a year since the last Butterfly Recorders meeting. In October, Butterfly Conservation launched its ambitious new strategy to recover, transform and inspire everyone to save butterflies and moths. And that's really going to push our butterfly conservation, recording and research effort over the next 5 years. But over the past year, we've also been laying the foundations to deliver that ambitious strategy. We've made changes to the recording and monitoring team, so it's a great pleasure to welcome Chloe Smith, Rachel Conway and Karen Purdy. They're helping really drive forward the implementation of our data review. And in Karen, we've got a GIS specialist to really develop that side of our work, which includes some training that she's running next month. Rachel is leading our supporting science project that we were grateful to get funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the Department of Culture, Media and Sport for. And this exciting project aims to really try and improve data flow, support county recorders and increase collaboration. I mean, it's really about trying to make things simpler for recorders, county recorders and butterfly conservation, and enable more people to join in, which is a good thing in itself. But there are sort of 4 other specific outputs from that project. One is a digital county recorders toolkit of guidance and resources to help county recorders and improve data flow. Also developing a data management portal to enable more data to be processed in one place, and also have additional functions that will help with verification. There's a program of iRecord training courses for county recorders, those who would like to help county recorders with verification. And of course, a big revamp of the Garden Butterfly Survey, including a new website. So I'd just like to thank you, all those involved in the expert working group of butterfly and moth recorders who have been helping to input into that work, and those testing the Garden Butterfly Survey website as well. So thank you, everyone. I've also got to mention some work slightly further afield that butterfly conservation is involved in. So we're just about to, we're involved in a project looking at the European Butterfly Red List. That's beginning this year, and we've got Sam Ellis and Martin Warren leading on that work for us. And I really can't finish off really without paying tribute to some county recorders. So I think first of all to Bill Stone, who stepped down as a Suffolk County recorder after 8 years. So thank you, Bill. And if you're not here, please somebody pass on that message to him. But sadly, I also need to mention Martin Anthony, the butterfly and macro moth recorder for Monmouthshire, who passed away earlier this month. And he was certainly somebody who really helped me during my time in Wales. So very, very sad to hear of his passing. And finally, Douglas Boys as well, who was the Montgomeryshire butterfly recorder. It's so sad that such an inspiring, engaging and dynamic naturalist and moth scientist died so young. Just to let you know, his appeal page is still running on the BC website if you want to make a donation, and all donations are going to go towards supporting the future generation of Lepidoptera scientists. So really, that's probably enough for me, other than just to say thank you to Zoe, or both Zoes, and the recording team for organising this meeting, and for the speakers for giving up their time, and for all of you for joining us today. So I do look forward to when these meetings can be face-to-face, and I can catch up with a few of you face-to-face at some point in future. So thank you, and I shall hand back to Richard.
Thanks very much, Russell. Yes, it'd be great to get back to face-to-face meetings, although of course we'll continue to run them online as well, so that everyone can enjoy. So before the break this morning, we've got reporting back on the various butterfly recording and monitoring schemes that run in the UK, including exciting developments in the form of the Decide project, and your sneak preview of the UK butterfly monitoring scheme results for last year. So we're going to start with a treble act of Zoe Randall, Ian Middlebrook and Megan Lowe, giving you an update on the recording and monitoring schemes. What could possibly go wrong? Zoe.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us on this lovely, beautiful, sunny day. I'm sure we'd much rather be outside, but I'm afraid you're stuck indoors listening to us. So I'm trying to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that I'm sharing my screen. Can I have a thumbs up or a yes from somebody?
Yeah, that's good, Zoe.
Super, lovely. Right, well, I've only got 10 minutes, so I'll rattle on. So I'm going to give you an update on the butterflies for the new Millennium scheme. Let's just minimize everybody. There we go. Okay, so where are we so far with 2020 data sets? Well, we've received almost 1.3 million records for 2020 so far. The map on the right shows the places, well, shows the distribution of records, the density of species at 10 kilometre square resolution. You can see there are a few gaps in the network there. We've got 7 data sets still to come. We've got 3 to be processed. So thank you to all the county recorders that have submitted their 2020 data so far. And just a little plea to those that haven't yet submitted their 2020 data, if you could do as soon as possible, that would be absolutely super, so we don't get too far behind, because obviously now 2021 data is coming in as well. And if any of you are struggling to get the records verified and collated, please do let me know, and we can offer you some help and assistance. Some great news actually in the County Recorder Network, and that is that the Isle of Man are for the Manx Wildlife Trust in collaboration with others on the Isle of Man are recruiting for a national butterfly recorder. So we'll have somebody in post very soon in the next couple of months to start collating data for the Isle of Man once more and submitting to the national scheme. So that's absolutely great news, and all involved are really pleased to be, you know, getting this sorted out. So more, I know I'll keep you updated on that. So this graph shows the growth in the BNM from 1995 to 2020. Recording has rocketed since 2013. There's been an upwards trend in the number of records, and over 1 million records have been submitted annually since 2018. And obviously 2020 is a little bit lower than 2019 here at the moment, but as I said, we've got 7 data sets still to receive and 3 more to process. So I'm sure that this bar will increase in due course. The BNM, all the records in the BNM span a recording period of 330 years, and we now hold 17.2 million butterfly records. Sorry, oh dear, blasphemy. 17.2 million butterfly records in the BNM, and 31% of which are from the past 5 years. So again, you know, it shows that recording is rocketing, it's getting more popular than ever, and that's great. So there is always some succession in the County Recorder Network, and over the past year we've seen several people leave the network for various reasons, and we'd like to thank them all for everything they've done for butterflies, butterfly recording, and the BNM, and welcome the successors to the network. County butterfly recorders are central to the success of the Butterflies for the New Millennium scheme. They're the vital volunteers that collate and verify the records and support the local recording community. You know, amongst other things, I know there's plenty more that county recorders do. And thank you all for all that you do. And we know that the workload for county recorders is increasing, and this is due to the popularity of butterfly and moth recording and the opportunities available. And it's great that so many people are getting involved, but obviously it does generate extra work. And that's where our Supporting Science project comes in. We received funding from the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport as part of their Heritage Lottery funding. And we set up this project. The main things that fed into it were the results from the County Moth Recorder questionnaire that we circulated 18 months or so ago, and also our data review work. So the whole point of Supporting Science is to help support county recorders. We've been running iRecord training in partnership with the Field Studies Council. We ran a course in November for county recorders and verification assistants, and over 40 people attended this course. We've got another iRecord training course run in May, where we're trying to engage more diverse communities to an introduction to iRecord training course. And maybe some of these people and county recorders and verification assistants that didn't attend the November training course might want to attend the iRecord verification training that we're running again in August. So we've also established an expert working group that consists of county butterfly recorders and county moth recorders and their assistants, and they will be helping to feed in to develop this toolkit for county recorders. The toolkit for county recorders includes things like NBN record cleaner training, QGIS training, county recorder guidance, and much, much more. And perhaps one of the really exciting developments of Supporting Science is going to be this development of a data management portal. And basically this will enhance and improve the iRecord functionality, and it's being co-created with input from the expert working group. And so setting up this data management portal in iRecord for county recorders to use, should they choose to, can help future-proof and future-proof the data management, and also help with succession planning. Another really exciting thing, it's been a really busy program so far for this project, but another really important thing has been the revamp of the garden butterfly survey, to which there'll be a promotional spring launch in the spring, early next month. And the Garden Butterfly Survey, it's a great stepping stone for keen big butterfly count participants. Over 900 gardens have already signed up, which is absolutely fantastic. So thank you to all of you that have signed up so far. And just to say as well, slightly further down the line, there will at some point in time be day-flying moths, common, easily recognised day-flying moths added to the Garden Butterfly Survey. So again, it helps to promote moths to a wider audience. So all of this work is basically about helping to smooth our data flows to get from this sort of spaghetti junction type looking model to a much more streamlined, clearer model. And the revamp of the Garden Butterfly Survey, and obviously the iRecord Butterflies app, the redevelopment of BNM Online and National Moth Recording Scheme Online, they're all based on iRecord, and so that will help smooth the data flows and get all the data, well, a lot of the data in one place rather than in standalone data sets, which is absolutely superb. County recorders are embracing verification in iRecord, which is absolutely fantastic, and you can see here the growth, the increase in the number of records being verified in iRecord over the last few years. So again, 83% of butterfly records in iRecord are currently verified, which is fabulous. So thank you to the county recorders and their assistants that are, getting on and embracing this new technology and new way of working. And as I said, there's plenty of support out there for you, for those of you that haven't yet taken the plunge. So I just want to give you a quick update on the big butterfly count that runs annually. Last year's count ran from the 16th of July to the 8th of August. We added 2 new target species, the Jersey tiger, because it's a beautiful, stunning day-flying moth, so that debunks all the myths about moths in one hit, that they're boring, drab, night-flying, jumper-munching pests, which clearly the Jersey tiger isn't. And we also added the Scotch Argus for participants in Scotland, as the Scotch Argus is as common and widespread in Scotland as the meadow brown is in England. So it was a no-brainer really to add this species. And the count runs again this year from the 15th of July to the 7th of August. I've got to rattle through, I'm totally running out of time. Over 152,000 people, counts were taken, counts were done. So that's an increase of 5% on 2020 levels. Over 107,000 citizen scientists took part, and they counted almost 1.4 million butterflies and day-flying moths. And when we look at the coverage of big butterfly count records, we can see that 78% of Britain is covered at 10 km² resolution. So, really great geographical coverage from big butterfly count participants. Another update to give you is that the iRecord Butterflies app has been updated. It now enables you to do single species timed counts, including marsh fritillary web searches and brown hair streak eggs. There's going to be, there's the inclusion of a selection of widespread and easily identifiable day-flying moths. And there's more feedback added, and you can see all of your records submitted on an interactive map. And alongside that as well, you get to find out whether your record has been verified or not as well. It gives you the verification status. So hopefully you'll agree these are all really good developments. All the data that you guys collect, it does not sit idle at all. We're making it work harder and harder. The BNM and NMRS data has fed into the DECIDE project, which is effectively square bashing for the 21st century. I'm just going to leave you with this tantalizing slide here, because I'm not say any more about DECIDE, because we've got a great talk from Michael Pocock later this morning. The NMRS and BNM data set have fed into our traits database, which was developed by Patrick Cook and other colleagues at Butterfly Conservation. So it's another great resource, freely available, features 968 macro moths and our butterfly species, and it includes information about life cycle, ecology and phenology, breeding habitats, conservation status and distribution trends and abundance trends. Really, really great piece of work there. So please do check out the traits database if you get a chance. It's the B&M and NMRS data have also fed into the development of an oak processionary moth toolkit, which provides a common framework for developing a local risk-based approach to managing oak processionary moth. So land owners and land managers can consult the butterflies and moths risk map. They can zoom into the map, and should aerial spraying or spraying of a nasty pesticide prove to be the thing that land managers can consider using to control oak processionary moth, they can zoom into this map and see exactly, if it's a red area, then it's quite high risk to other Lepidoptera species in that area. So again, hopefully really practical use of these data. So basically, your records inform all of Butterfly Conservation's work, and we couldn't do what we do without you. It's the bedrock, basically, of all of our work. So the data feeds into single site management, landscape scale conservation projects, advice to landowners, be that farmers or highways agencies and local authorities. The data feeds in and helps us do scientific research. We can produce distribution trends, feed into red lists, and obviously our publications like the atlases, the state of reports, and all of our engagement work. So please do keep recording butterflies and sending in your data, and rest assured we're using your data and it's working hard, and we're helping to save butterflies and moths. And I will stop there because I've gone over. So on to Ian Middlebrook. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Zoe. Just make sure I've got my presentation up. Right, can I have some thumbs up or nods? Can anyone see that? Yeah, okay, that sounds promising. Right, so just a very quick update then of what's happening with the UK Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. These are the topics that I'm going to be covering in the next few minutes. I shall rattle through them fairly quickly so we can try and make up a bit of time. So we'll get started. So first of all, a quick update on where we are with funding for the project. So for those who keep track of these things, you'll know that we're actually coming to the end of our current 5-year contract at the end of March. Because of the difficulties that have occurred over the last couple of years, we've not negotiated a new long-term contract just yet, but what we do have signed off is an agreement to continue funding at the current level for a further year. So we now have a year's grace in which to continue the scheme and also to sort out our long-term future. In terms of staff changes, Russell's already mentioned Rachel Conway joining the recording team on the supporting science project. She's also, in addition to that, supporting UK BMS volunteers. So she's taken on that role for 1.5 days of her working week, supporting transect recorders and coordinators, and she's done a great job so far. And I'll also pay tribute to one of our long-standing transect coordinators from the branches, Rob Smith, who stood down this year covering the Essex transects, and he's been doing that for over 10 years. So thanks very much to Rob for everything that he's done for the scheme over that time, and good luck to Keith Winch, who's taken over that role. Right, so where are we with monitoring coverage? How many sites have been covered across the scheme? So obviously we've had rapid growth in the scheme across most recent years, with a not very obvious dip in 2020 due to the coronavirus outbreak. But we've had a really good bounce back that's been great to see. When we did our exit survey after 2020, 80% of people who had stopped said that they were intending to come back to the scheme, and it looks very much as if they have. So 2021 was in fact one of the top 3 years in terms of the number of sites that we managed to cover for monitoring. It was actually a record year for standard transects. So that was great news. What hasn't bounced back to quite the same extent is the number of non-transects, the time counts, egg counts, that kind of thing hasn't quite got back to the level that we need it to be. So there's going to be some work to do to build that back up, which will, when I talk about the gap analysis in a minute, is where we will be with that. So yeah, a record number a year for standard transects, so over 1,900 sites were walked in 2021, and when you think, if you go back to 2015, we were still below 1,500 transects. So that's been a very rapid growth in the size of the transect scheme in the last few years. And so last year that includes 195 new transects that were set up across the year. And these are the branches where the highest number of new sites were set up. So big thank you to the coordinators there, particularly Ken Orp in the East Midlands, who's been doing that job for a long time, but has still got the enthusiasm to go out and generate lots of new transects there. And also to Nick Hall in Yorkshire, who's much newer to the scheme, but has thrown himself into it and is doing a great job there. So thanks very much to all our coordinators who are helping to grow the scheme. So a bit of an update on the website. So developers have been working hard over the winter, thanks to support from our partners over at UKCH and a bit of additional funding also from JNCC. They've been rectifying some of the issues that were beginning to crop up in the running of the website. So hopefully it should be back running smoother now by the time you start entering your data next week or the week after, yeah. But there's also been a couple of new features added. One of them is this here. So this is a nice simple link to enter your data. So for any recorders who struggle to navigate the menus to find their way into the calendar to enter their accounts, there's now a nice easy link right at the top on the main menu where you can just click on there to enter your account, and that will take you through to this screen where you just choose whether it's a transect or a wider countryside square, etc., and that will take you straight through to the data entry screen. So hopefully that'll make it easier for some of you that are not such regular visitors to the website and struggle to remember how to get to the data entry. And we got Megan to thank for this as well, actually. So I hope I haven't stolen her thunder, but yeah, she was instrumental in getting this sorted. And another feature is one that our coordinators, some of our coordinators have been asking for a little while. And this is what happens at the end of the year when you've entered all of your data. So we now have a flag where you can let your coordinator know that you've entered all your data for the year. So as soon as you finish entering your last count, you just need to tick that little box there that says finish for year, click on save, and then the coordinator has a list of all the users that are linked to transects within their branch area, and they can see on that right hand side who's finished entering data and who hasn't. So they'll know who to chase or who not to chase. So hopefully our coordinators will find that useful at the end of the season. Just a couple more areas of work that we're hoping to progress over the next year. So we're intending to do a gap analysis where we look at where our priority species are being monitored and where they're not being monitored. So we compare our monitoring data with the distribution data and see where the gaps are and try and identify areas which are going to be important to grow our monitoring. And particularly when we look back at the coverage plot that showed that our time counts, etc., hadn't reached the levels that they were in the past. This is one of the tools that we're going to use to try and target any additional monitoring so that we can produce much more representative trends for some of our more restricted species. And hopefully so this work will inform the conservation work of BC staff and inform our branch coordinators in terms of how they target additional monitoring in those areas. So hopefully you'll be hearing from us across the next year about this. And then the final thing to mention is the purple hair streak monitoring trial. So I think at this meeting last year, I mentioned we were going to hold a trial of a new early evening transect method surveying the canopy for purple hair streaks. So we did hold a trial through the summer. Quite a few volunteers got involved and they gave us some really, really useful feedback. So big thanks to all those volunteers that did that. The feedback, there were some common themes to the feedback, which led us to sort of revisit the method. One or two issues, particularly a possible health and safety issue of walking continually along a rough woodland ride whilst staring up at the canopy. So we're having a rethink. We're going to revise the methodology into more of a sort of occasional point count type methodology. So you walk, look where you're going, and then stop, and then survey the canopy for 2 or 3 minutes, and then carry on. So we'll be revising that methodology and carrying out a further trial this year rather than rolling out the method for real. So anybody who wants to get involved in that trial, please get in touch with me, and I'll make sure you get a copy of the revised methodology before it goes out and before the purple hair streaks are out in the summer. So that's it from me, apart from just saying a big thank you, of course, as usual, to all our incredible volunteers, our recorders and our transect coordinators that helped to make the scheme one of the most successful insect recording schemes in the world. And thanks also, of course, to all our project partners, all our funders, and all the other organisations who contribute to the scheme. So thanks very much. And now it's time for me to stop and hand you across to Megan to talk about the wider countryside scheme.
Brilliant, thank you, Ian. Let me just try and share my screen here. There we go. Brilliant. Well, hi everyone. Pleasure to be here today. It's my first ever Butterfly Recorders meeting, believe it or not. So I'm Megan Lowe. I coordinate the wider countryside butterfly survey. So I've just got a few slides today about the survey, some updates from 2021, and some opportunities for this coming year as well. So for those that are not familiar with the wider countryside butterfly survey, which I'll probably refer to as the WCBS from now on, it's a national survey that feeds into the UK Butterfly Monitoring Scheme and is run in partnership with Butterfly Conservation, the BTO, UKCEH and JNCC. It was established in 2009 to help give us a better idea of how butterflies are faring in the wider countryside. Unlike standard butterfly transects, the wider countryside butterfly surveys take place in randomly selected 1 kilometre squares across the UK and are allocated to volunteers through a network of voluntary local champions. The survey methodology follows that of the BTO's breeding bird survey, and BTO volunteers can also get involved with the butterfly survey through their breeding bird survey squares. In brief, the method involves counting butterflies along 2 1-kilometre routes through the square that run in parallel to one another. So as you can see on the map here, each of these routes are split into 5 200-metre sections, so there's 10 sections overall. This is kind of what an ideal route looks like, but in reality it's much more likely to look like this because of the various different barriers and terrains that you encounter within the countryside. The survey is less time intensive than transects, so we ask that recorders visit and record butterflies in their square at least twice between July and August, but more counts are obviously very welcome during the earlier spring and summer months as well. And as with transects, we just ask that recorders follow the standard UKBMS criteria in terms of the time of day and the weather conditions. If you'd like to find out more about the survey, then there's lots of information on the UKBMS website, which is just ukbms.org. So 2021 was the 13th year of the wider countryside WCBS scheme. I'm not actually going to tell you much about the results because we're all obviously very eager to hear from Mark, who's going to give us the full UKBMS results in a moment. But I have picked out a few highlights. So in 2021, over 1,800 WCBS surveys were carried out by approximately 600 recorders. There were over 98,000 butterflies of 48 species, and that included the 25 wider countryside species, 20 habitat specialist species, and the 3 regular migratory species. And within the wider countryside surveys as well, we ask, or at least we give the option to record day-flying moths and dragonflies and damselflies. So in 2021, we received records of 77 species of moth and 26 species of dragonflies and damselflies. And all of those records go into iRecord, where they get verified and sent off to the relevant recording schemes. There were some new discoveries, as I call them, in the WCBS this year as well. So 75 WCBS squares received their first survey in 2021. So that was 54 breeding bird survey squares, or survey for butterflies for the first ever time, and 21 butterfly conservation squares. And 12 of those squares had no previous butterfly records, according to the BNM, the Butterflies for New Millennium data set. So of those 12 squares, or shall I say within those 12 squares, 24 species were recorded. So again, these are completely new records. We didn't know the butterflies were there in those particular 1 kilometre squares before. And there were some habitat specialists seen within those squares as well. So this is just an example really of how the WCBS helps with our knowledge of butterfly distribution. So the coverage in 2021, we were up slightly, very pleased to say, up slightly from the dip experienced in 2020. So we've got on this chart here, we've got the pink bars are the butterfly conservation squares, the blue ones are the breeding bird survey squares, and then the green is the total. So in total, at least as of the data submitted by the 13th of December, we had 787 results in from 787 squares. So that's about an average year, I'd say, for the WCBS. We're a little way off of one of our top years of 2019. So that can be our slightly more ambitious target for this year, is to try and meet or exceed the level of coverage seen then. Now, looking at regional coverage, you can see on the map on the right here, these are where the visits took place in 2021. So the pink circles are butterfly conservation squares, and the blue ones are the breeding bird survey squares. You quite clearly can see there are a few gaps here and there where we're not currently having square. There will be squares in these areas, but they're not being visited by recorders. But we can see this much more clearly if within this map, which shows you the BC branch area. So each one of these shapes on the map is a separate BC butterfly conservation branch area. And the darker the green is the higher coverage. So where we've had more squares surveyed in 2021, the areas are highlighted in a darker green. The areas with the least coverage are in these kind of lighter areas. So in terms of your kind of, I suppose, top coverage, the top 3 branches that achieved the best coverage in 2021 were Dorset with an incredible 75 WCBS squares surveyed, Gloucestershire with 54, and Hampshire and Isle of Wight with 48. But there were these other darker green ones also achieve what we call good coverage. So good coverage is defined as having 30 or more squares covered within a BC branch area. And so just a quick shout out to Sussex, Norfolk, Bedfordshire and Northants, Suffolk and Surrey and South West London, who also achieved good coverage. So well done to all of them. These kind of medium greens are the branch areas that achieved 20 or more, but less than 30 squares covered. And then the lightest areas here are the ones where really we could do with a bit more help. We could do with some more recorders on the ground, getting out and surveying some more squares. Dorset and Gloucestershire actually achieved their best ever years in terms of coverage, and so did Hertfordshire and Middlesex. So Hertfordshire and Middlesex are really close now to achieving good coverage with just 29 squares covered. So that leads me on very quickly to opportunities to get involved in 2022. So like I say, there's lots of wider countryside squares across the whole of the UK. So if anybody's interested, please visit the website, or you can either contact me or your local WCBS champion. Their contact details are on the KBMS website. So you can go onto there and find out who your champion is and get involved that way. Or if you are involved with the breeding bird survey, then you can contact the BTO and sign up to the wider countryside via that route. We also have champion vacancies from time to time, and this year at the moment we're currently looking for champions in Northern Ireland and Lincolnshire. And occasionally we have other champion vacancies come up throughout the year. And then another way you can get involved is through holiday squares. So holiday squares are where we ask people that are holidaying in particular areas. So at the moment we've got lots of squares in Wales, Northern England and Scotland. And these are ones where you can just sign up to do a survey as a one-off. So again, on UK BMS website, we have a holiday square section. I think it's under My Data. So if you go to My Data and a little drop down menu will come up and you can click on holiday squares and you can assign yourself to a holiday square on there. I'll get a notification and then I can send you all the information that you need to get involved. So do have a look at that if you're planning on visiting any of these areas really from May onwards. Ideally July and August, but we're not too fussy really. So anytime when it's warm enough to get out and survey the butterflies, you can do. You can get involved with Holiday Square. So finally, that was a really quick tour through the wide countryside for 2021. So I just wanted to say a few thank yous. So I wanted to say a special thank you to Penny Wells, Rachel Pateman, Alan Dawson, Rachel Conway and Alan Chadwick, who all retired as champions in 2021. And thank you all for all of your help over the years with promoting the scheme. Welcome to new champions, so some of which have replaced those ones that have retired. Those are Andy Danford, David Prince and Nick Hall. And really, yeah, just a final huge thank you to all of the wide countryside butterfly survey recorders, and especially to our champions and the regional organisers for the BTO as well, who do an absolutely grand job at promoting and coordinating the scheme within their areas. And I'm just going to leave a couple of contact details there in case anybody wants to get in touch about the Wide Countryside Butterfly Survey. Otherwise, I will hand back over to Richard. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Megan, Ian, Zoe, for that quick roundup, lightning pace, and welcome to your first ever UK Butterfly Recorders meeting, Megan. I don't know how you managed to manage so long without coming along to one, but yeah, it's good to have you here. Right, we are slightly over time, so we've been dealing with any questions that come up in the chat box and the Q&A box, and we will move straight on because I'm sure for many of you this is the highlight of the meeting each year, and you get a sneak preview. To be kept quiet, please, not to be tweeted or otherwise broadcast to the wider world until our press release goes out next week. But here is Mark Botham from UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology to give you a preview of the butterfly population results for last year. Mark.
Hello, I'm just trying to get this up. I always have this problem every year.
Shall I fill?
My screen.
Do a little dance or something?
Can you see my screen yet?
No.
No, okay, great. Fantastic. I've had problems with this recently, so what about...
Yeah, there's some things happening.
Great.
Yeah,
okay.
see a nice mocker.
Yeah, sorry, that's my... Can you see the... You can't see the right screen yet then?
Yeah, I can see the whole of that at the minute.
Okay, this is what happens every time. I don't know why. Let me try something else. Let's see. Apologies for this. It happens every time, and especially when you've got already short.
That's better. That's better. That looks good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the other issues I have, so I'll bring it up right now, is that sometimes people can't hear me because I have to look to my other screen. So please, Rachel, I'm going to try and stare right at the screen. It's not because I'm trying to make you look at me really closely. It's because my computer setup's a bit weird. So hello again, everyone. Seems like a really long year to me. It seems to, and especially this winter just seems to have dragged on. But it's been an amazing week, as Russell said, and I'm actually baking in my room at the moment. So again, excuse me, especially now my face is really close. If you think that I'm in a sauna or something, it does feel like that. Anyway, I've got lots to report on again as normal, so I'll have to go through it pretty quick, and I'm sorry about that in advance. And I have to go pretty quickly after this talk. So if you've got any questions, do email me if you want to. Personally. I've started the talk with a picture of Heath Fertility, and I'll come on to talk about that because that's one of the really good stories from 2021. As Richard mentioned, I always have to say in the talk, if it's going to work, which it isn't, please don't share these results just yet. We put our press release out next week, and it's really good at generating attention for the scheme and all the hard work that you've done. So we try and lessen that impact by just not saying anything before that goes out. So this is a sneak preview, as was alluded to earlier. So you get this privilege of seeing results early for all your hard work that's gone into it. So I'll just say that one time again and then move on. This slide you've already seen from Ian, so I won't dwell on it, but it's fantastic that we got this bounce back. Absolutely amazing with the number of transits that keep going on. You kind of might have expected that in 2021, there may have still been some effect of COVID, but there wasn't really. We got more transits than we've ever had before. As Ian's already mentioned, the number of timed counts and live web counts was down a little bit. And it's a bit of a shame because a couple of species that we haven't been able to do the analysis for this year, so checkered skipper and large blue, for example, I'm not going to be able to present you with the data for those this year. So they'll be out of the analysis, but the work is still ongoing with those. There's lots going on. I'm sure next year we'll be able to report on those again. I'm going to start, usually I go on in the weather, and I am going to go on about the weather because weather is very important, of course, but I'm going to start going straight into the meat and telling you what kind of a year it was for the butterflies in 2021. It'll probably come as no surprise for everyone that it was a pretty poor year. Counts were really down for most species, and it was actually the ranked 28th out of 46 years. So, yep, not that great. 19 species actually showed an annual increase, and I'll come on to talk about those in a little while. But unfortunately, 36 species showed an annual decrease. So not great, pretty bad for most species. And there was just one species, which was the grayling, which showed no annual change at all. So it basically had the same average relative abundance across all sites as it did in the year before. So I usually present the weather charts that you get straight off the Met Office, but David Roy pointed me to these on Twitter from Neil Kay at Met Office, and he's kindly let me reproduce these. So these graphs show you what I think are really nice plots showing the whole of the UK. So for example, on this temperature one, and the other ones I show you will do the same thing, where you've got above the average temperatures, you've got red, and that also translates onto the UK maps. You can see that going along. And then where you've got blue, that's because it's below average temperatures compared to the long-term series. Hope that makes sense. I'm not going to dwell on all these things, but what's really important here, I'm going to pick out the main things that obviously affected the butterfly numbers in 2021. April was extremely cold. One of the coldest Aprils, well below the average, and there was the greatest number of days of air frost since 1960. And I think someone told me, I don't know how true it is, but I couldn't find the actual statistic for it, but in the UK, every day in April, there was a frost somewhere at least. So it was a really cold April. It was pretty dry, pretty sunny, as I'll come on to in a moment, but very cold. And any hopes of that changing in May didn't really occur. It stayed very cold. It was the coldest May since 1996. And as we'll see in a moment, it was very wet as well. But there was an interesting development as this season goes on. Even in May, in fact, we started to get a little bit of a dichotomy between where these temperatures were existing. So if you look at those maps going along the bottom of the UK, you see as we progress through the season that it's the southwest of most of England where the temperatures stay below average, even in some of the warmer. So in August, for example, it's below average. That's one of our main, one of the main parts of the season for getting the large numbers of butterflies on transects. Whereas in Northern Ireland and Scotland, it's red in most areas still because they actually enjoyed a really good summer at this point. And this is quite important when we come on to talk about the results later, because we start to see a bit of a divergence in how some of the species reacted. So moving on to the rainfall, a similar kind of thing here, where it's green, it's above average rainfall, where it's below average, so dry. And you can see the same things happening with that across the country. So the southeast, basically, in England, enjoyed a much worse summer, which is quite unusual. You don't get to say that very often. Scotland and Northern Ireland actually did much better. You can see May was really wet, so the summer species are obviously not going to have done too well looking at the April and May weather graphs so far. Here's the sunshine. April was actually super sunny, a bit like the COVID year, actually. And that was across the whole of the UK. But again, you can see May was really dull, was really wet, really cold. And then as we move through June and July, it's Scotland, Northern Ireland, and part of Northern England as well, which starts to have the most sunshine. And it gets quite dull when you get to August again, especially for Southern England. So some quite interesting things there. Thanks again to Neil Kay, who won't be in the audience, but thanks for him for lending me these fantastic graphs. A slightly nicer way of looking at the weather data there. So how did this translate into what happened with the butterflies? Well, first of all, I don't know what everyone else felt, but it just felt like nothing was happening last year for a long time. Things didn't come up for ages. Everything was getting laid, but it's always easy to feel that's happening every year because we remember the year before rather than the long term. And here I've just plotted the average number of species recorded across all transects. And you can see in the red line, which is 2021, and the dotted line, which is the series since 1976, so the average across all transects. It's actually late that we start seeing the same number of species in 2021, even compared to the long-term average, despite the fact that over time, we know that species are coming out earlier and earlier. So that's one indication that things were a bit late. And the same is translated in the average number of butterflies. Not only is the peak much narrower in the red, again, 2021, and not as big, but also it's a lot later. So that's when we kind of get our peak in the butterfly numbers, and it was still later because generally speaking, things were pretty late in 2021. As I say, certainly for myself, I always kind of compare what's happened the previous year because that's what's fresh in my mind, and it always biases that. So here's a plot of 2021 compared to 2020. No surprises that in 2020, when it was really warm, we had things came out quite early. When we look at the phenology here, so on the x-axis, you've got the 2020 data. So this is each species plotted with the day that it came out in 2020 on the x-axis and the day that it came out in 2021 on the y-axis. So the black line that goes across there is a one-to-one line, which means that anything above that means that it came out later in 2021, and anything below that means it came out earlier in 2021, if that makes sense. No surprises here when we compare it just to the year before, everything, well, not everything, every species, but most species came out quite a lot later than they did in 2020. That's how my memory plays tricks on me. But actually, if we look at the long-term data series as well, so given that if we look at everything since 1976, and we know that a lot of species have been coming out up to 2 or 3 weeks earlier than they did at the start of the series, but yet when we look at this, same one-to-one line again, so you've got the average for the whole series on the x-axis, 2021 data on the y, most species still fall above that line, which means that they came out later in 2021, even compared to the long-term average. So that's really bucking the trend of species coming out early. So it was a really late year. Showing you that data in April and May for the weather, how cold it was and everything. So it's no surprise that some of the spring species came out particularly late. So grizzle skipper was over a week later than the long-term average. Green hairstreak also a week, but this carried on through the season. So purple emperor was also on average 7 days later on transects in 2021 than it was for the long-term average. And that's still continued all the way into August, September, with brown hairstreak being over a week later. And actually this had one of its latest average mean dates of being recorded on the transects. So a really late year. We're getting on to the trends now. I'm trying to kind of focus more and more away from the kind of annual trends, but it is quite interesting to know what kind of a year it was generally, and then to try and set that in the context and see how that's affected the long-term trends. When we look at these family traces, this is me just taking the composite indices over all the species within the family as we've named them, so the skippers, the whites, browns, etc. You can see that there was only one family that did well overall as a family in 2021. That was the fritillaries, which is quite unusual because so many of these habitat specialists, we often report that they've gone down or up, and so they seem to be contrasting. But it was a really good year overall for these species, whereas all the other families you can see had quite substantial declines compared to 2020. Swallowtail in a family of its own, the only butterfly from that family in the UK, had a slight decline compared to 2020, but this stable trend over time, and it was a kind of average year for that if you look on the plot here for 2021. Skippers as a family, as I say, were down 18%. And here's just a view of all the species that we've created indices for in 2021. One species, Essex skipper, showed a slight increase, but all the other species showed an annual decline. And the hardest hit of those seemed to be the large skipper, which was down by 29%, so almost a third, and produced its 4th worst year on record. But as you can see, that's the trend there is of stable population. So it's had a bad year, but hopefully it'll bounce back next year. Although you can see, while we're in that last 10 years, which is highlighted in orange, that the last 6 years are below average. So something going on with the large skipper there. Silver spotted skipper has been doing really well across the UK. It's been increasing. It's got this long-term significant increase. But it had a pretty bad year in 2021. It was down by 40%. And given that all the populations are in the southeast of England, it's not really a surprise when you look at the weather plots that I showed you earlier, where basically the summer was very, very up and down and not particularly good for most of it in that region of the UK. Moving on to the whites, these were perhaps one of the hardest hit groups, but some weird things going on there, as I'm going to show you in a moment, down by 26% overall as a family. and no species in the whites actually showed an annual increase in 2021. They were all down. Brimstone and orange tip have been increasing quite a lot in recent years because they're expanding their ranges. So they're often shown in blue because they've been increasing and they've been doing particularly well in Scotland. But the common whites keep going up and down, up and down. And they had a really funny year in 2021 because they were down in England and they were down in Wales, as you can see from this table at the top, which shows you that there was a real division, which I've tried to illustrate on this UK plot here by saying where I've coloured it in red is where there were declines in these three species, and where I've coloured it in blue is where there was increases. So that weather difference between Northern Ireland and Scotland and the rest of the UK seems to have had a really pronounced effect on these three species, because you can see, especially in Northern Ireland, the increases in large white and small white were quite amazing, and large white in Scotland as well. But of course, we know that the UK trends themselves are heavily biased, because a lot of the transects are in England and in the south of the UK. And so green-veined white, the trend for that overall in the UK was quite a bad trend, down by 27%, and its fourth worst year on record. But again, like all of the whites, it's a kind of stable trend for the common white. Sorry, it's a stable trend in the long term. Orange tip, I find an interesting story with this one, because it was down only slightly in 2021, and you can see it's got at the UK level, it's got a significant increase in the long term. And if we break that down into the countries, we can see a difference going on with each country. So you've got England on the top right here, and Northern Ireland in the bottom right, where there was decreases in 2021, and where this species is showing a stable trend in the long term. But if we go and have a look at Wales and Scotland, something entirely different is going on. It's increasing in both of these countries in the long term, especially in Scotland. But it actually increased in 2021 in Wales as well, and just a small decline in Scotland, which, you know, these species don't go up and down, and it's been increasing quite a lot in Scotland, so I don't think there's much to fear there. The browns were down by 3% overall, and you can see here, I'll just show you all the species. Grayling had the same index as it did in 2020. Large heath, wall, and speckled wood all did quite well, especially large heath there, and wall, which I'll come to show you in a moment. But the rest of the species did quite badly. Now, in 2020, when I presented the results, all of the common browns had shown quite a substantial decline. They didn't do particularly well in the UK overall. And I showed these plots which showed the total numbers. And I had a look at this again, and looking at the total number of butterflies on transects and working out the percentage of these butterflies that are meadow brown, gatekeeper ringlet, or marble white, on average, it's about 50% of all butterflies on transects in any given year. And that's been increasing recently because marble white and ringlet have both been expanding their ranges and increasing in number. So that's going up to about 60%. So that's really the bulk of transect butterfly species, well, in terms of the biomass and the numbers that we get on transects. So when something bad happens with these, we know that that's probably going to have quite a big knock-on effect. So here you've got the marble white and the ringlet, because these are two species that have been increasing, but they both had small annual declines, as you can see there, but both significantly increasing in the long term. And then we look at the gatekeeper meadow brown, where there's some different trends going on. So the gatekeeper is actually showing a significant decline now, and it's got quite a lot of years below average in the last 10 years in particular, and none above average in the last 10 years, more worryingly. So something is really going on with this species, especially since it still seems to be expanding its range slightly at the same time. Meadow brown, stable trend in the long term, but down by another 17% in 2021. So the biomass, or the numbers, however you want to put it, was down quite considerably on transects. And it was very quiet transects during July and August, I think. I mean, I didn't get out as much because the weather was just so hard to get transects done around here. It was a pretty awkward year, actually. Probably, if I was to do this again, going back to something Zoe said in her talk, I should include Scotch Argus, so that the numbers, the biomasses in Scotland is also represented a bit more fairly there. And that's an oversight by me, that when I heard Zoe mention that, I thought, yes, Scotch Argus should definitely be in there as well. And I don't know what would happen there, but Scotch Argus also showed a decline in both the UK level and Scotland level in 2021 as well. So fantastic news for the wall, which is a species we've heard about quite a lot in the past because it's been declining so much. Again, when we look at this at different country levels, there's different things going on, and this had a 20% increase, which is marvellous for the species. It's still below average, and the long-term decline in the UK is still significant. And all of the years in the last 10 years are below average, but it's nice to see this bounce back. And if you took that 10-year trend, clearly that's not declining anymore. In England, the species is obviously doing its worst. In Wales, it's doing quite badly as well, but in Scotland, it's showing this massive increase. And it had its best year on record in Scotland, up by over, well, 182%, so over 100%. So a good year for the wall, which is really nice to see. And the good news with the fritillaries, they're the only group that actually showed as a group an annual increase, but about 14%. You can see here, all but 2 species actually showed an increase, and 2 species had their second best year on record in the UK. And both those species, Glanville fritillary and Darkgreen fritillary, also had their best years on record in England. Darkgreen fritillary had its second best year when I reported in 2020 as well, so that's 2 really good years in a row. So although it's only a 7% increase on 2020, that's a really, really good result, because it's been going up for the last couple of years. And as you can see, there's a significant long-term increase and the best year on record in England. So really nice to see the species turning up on way more translates than it has done before, and in better numbers. And really nice to see good fortunes for the small purple fritillary. When you look at the UK trend, you can see the last 10 years again are all below average. And so they're still below average numbers despite this increase. But when we look at it in Scotland, there's a very different trend being shown here. It's up by 62%. That's quite massive. And it had a long-term and short-term trends of both significant increase for the species in Scotland. So it'd be interesting to know what different is going on between the populations of the species in Scotland and elsewhere. And the really good news story is the heath fritillary and uptune fortunes for the species, up by 14% now. Every time I present this, there's always kind of some queries as to what, and I haven't personally seen it myself last year, but I heard it was a very good year for heath fritillary. And we know that the transects aren't always the best method for picking up this species, because the species moves around as the management moves around. So it's following the coppice management. We do have time counts that account for this, but we didn't have as many in 2021. And therefore, perhaps this increase would have been even bigger on monitored sites if we'd had that data as well. Who knows? But it still showed this big increase. And more importantly, the short-term trend is a significant increase. So there's a real upturn in fortunes for the species, which is great news. So moving on to the Vacancies, which were down by about 16%. Again, a bit of a mixed picture with these. So Painted Lady, Purple Emperor and Red Admiral all showed an increase, but the rest of the species were down in 2021. So Tale of the Admirals and Emperors, I always try to put something like that in there. And the Red Admiral, which has been doing rather well in the long term anyway, as well as the Purple Emperor, both had really good years. So fifth best year on record for Red Admiral, 9th best year on record for the Purple Emperor, both showing pretty big annual increases there, and well above average years, especially for Red Admiral in 2021. But unfortunately, the White Admiral is doing something rather different, and you can see there in the last 10 years in orange on the right, the last 10 years have all been below average or at the best average. And this was its 3rd worst year on record in 2021, down by 24%. So something worrying going on with this species. Duke of Burgundy, again, one of the only representative in its family for this species, so that's presented separately, down by 33%. No surprises because of that spring weather that I showed you, really cold, and particularly in May as well, when it was not just cold but wet. Obviously had an adverse effect on this species and its ability to be out and flying about and recorded on transects. Blues only down by 3% overall as a family, and as you can see from this, it's a pretty mixed bag, with about half species actually showing annual increases with some really good news stories, and the other half of the species showing annual declines. And actually, if you look at that very quickly, a lot of the species in blue are more habitat specialists, a lot in the ones in red. There are exceptions in there, tend to be the wider countryside species, some of our more common species like small copper, for example, and common blue, and holly blue, which I'll come on to in a moment. So all these tables are scaled with the biggest increase at the top right down to the biggest declines at the bottom. So you can see holly blue right at the bottom there. Brown hairstreak, black hairstreak, and chalk hill blue all had their 3rd best years on record, and silver blue did really well too. So chalk hill blue there up by 48%. Long-term trend for this species is it's a stable trend. It's been going up for year after year for the last 5 years, and well above average in 2021. So really nice to see those of these species if you go out on transects and the chalk grasslands in southern England. And really impressively, only up by 2%, but this is following a good year in 2020 as well. 4th best year on record for Silverstone blue. Long and short-term trends of the species now show significant increase. And there's lots more translates coming in where we're recording the species, and there's been some fantastic management put in place to try and benefit this species. So really good to see this one doing well. Holly blue, I don't think there's anything to worry about here, because we know very well with holly blue, it goes up, down, up, down, up, down. It has these big cycles in its population. What is interesting is we look at this over time, is that the kind of magnitude of these cycles seems to be getting less and less. But certainly for the last few years in the urban area I live in, the holly blue does rather well. It was noticeably down last year, but still it seems to be doing quite well. It was a below average year. It was down by 50% compared to 2020, but it's, you know, this is a species that does go up and down. So who knows what will happen this year? I haven't seen one yet myself this year, but I've had lots of butterflies out in this last week because it's been such fantastic weather, and I'm hoping it'll be out soon. So I'm going to finish there, and I'm sorry for finishing on one of the species that did the best. There are some, despite it being a poor year in 2021, there were some really good stories there, some really good results for some of the species that have been doing badly in the long term previously, and reversing some of those trends. I thank all of you for the masses of hard work you put into getting out, especially in testing years like 2020 and 2021, where it's either the weather or COVID or something. Who knows what's going to be next, because it seems like there's always something happening these days. And all the coordinators as well, and then everyone in our partnership, and all the people who provide me with these fantastic photos, which I don't seem to be able to take because butterflies are just too fast for me, and I've got no patience. And thank you all for listening.
Thanks very much, Mark. Well, I think we're going to club together and buy you a headset for next year. So, but so you can turn whichever direction you feel the urge without it impacting on your sound. But thanks very much for that.
Was the sound bad then? Was it?
It was a bit on and off. It was mainly on, but it certainly dropped out from time to time. But fascinating results as always, and a brilliant, very well put together presentation, great graphs and analyses and things. Really good. Thanks. I'm going to move us straight on though, because we're over time at the moment. So the final talk before we have a break was due to be given by Michael Pocock from UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. Unfortunately, Michael can't be with us today at short notice, but very kindly he's pre-recorded his talk. So I'm hoping that one of the Zoes will, Zoe Randall's nodding, that's good, will be able to load that up, and we'll still be able to enjoy the fascinating insights into this DECIDE project, which Zoe alluded to earlier on in her talk as well. So I'll hand over to you, Zoe.
Lovely, thanks Richard. Thanks to everyone else that's spoken this morning. Michael's presentation is fabulous. I had a little pre-run last night about midnight. And oh, what I didn't do, hold on, I didn't press the special button, the share sound. And Michael passes on his thanks to all of those that have been involved in the co-design and co-creation of the tool so far. So I've shared sound, I'm sharing screen, so hopefully someone will let me know. Oh, I can't find the play button. How do I get to the play button? Got this silly Zoom thing in the way. Let's just try clicking on that. There we go. Right, ready, steady. If I can have a yes, it's working from someone.
Hello, I'm Michael Pocock from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. I'm so sorry not to be able to join you live today. Sadly, I'm at a funeral at the time you're watching this. The privilege of being able to do things virtually is that I can record this and show you this talk. So I will share my screen, and hopefully this will all work. Make it slideshow. There we go. So I'm going to be talking to you about the DECIDE project. This is a project which is subtitled Recording Nature Where It Matters. And I'll say a bit more about what that means as I go through. So we know that volunteer collected biodiversity data is so valuable. Mark Botham will have wowed you with the results of the butterfly monitoring scheme. And we know that These data are really valuable for assessing the state of nature, evaluating trends, evaluating distributions, and thinking about the impacts of interventions, both positive and some of those threats to biodiversity. We also know that it's really valuable because it benefits individuals. People like you and me will get a whole load of joy from going out, recording butterflies, recording moths and other insects and so on. And actually, we've done some work at UKCH over the past couple of years, and more coming this summer, which is going to be, or which has been looking at the actual psychological benefits of recording nature and taking part in citizen science, the way in which it can connect people to nature and support well-being. All of this, obviously, we hope builds together to connect people to nature and use the data for positive reasons to support action for nature. So how are the citizen science data collected? Well, we can think about that sort of what's been called sometimes the gold standard, the structured monitoring, going out, visiting a transect site multiple times over the course of the summer. This is basically acting like a professional scientist, but doing it in a voluntary capacity. We also know the success of projects like iRecord, where people can go out and have been doing this sort of thing for decades and decades, way before smartphones, go out, make records of butterflies whenever and wherever they want. And we know that we can get many millions of records actually gathered in that way. In between fits this semi-structured recording, like the big butterfly count. You follow a protocol, but you take part where you want to. And all of these are really great, but they do have challenges. One of the biggest challenges is that unstructured recording is spatially uneven. So we need to try and deal with that statistically in the analysis that we do. You can see here that that's true at a national scale. And so we get much more recording in parts of England than we do in, say, the Midlands of Wales or the Highlands of Scotland. And that's also true at a local scale as well. So here are butterfly records from iRecord from Chesham, and you can see that where people record is clustered. It's clustered in particular habitats and in particular places. And there are many places where actually we still don't even have records, even in this fairly well recorded part of Britain. And so that leads us on to think that all records are valuable. We definitely want to be encouraging more and more people to get involved in recording, but I would argue that we don't simply need more records, we need more informative records. Now, how you define what more informative is can vary, and it will vary depending on the context and the question being asked. However, it leads on to this question of how do you choose where to actually go recording? Well, one of the ways in which we've done this is we've used the targeting revisits map. And so this is a project which we've developed. We've been looking at a few recording schemes where there are tend to be fewer recorders, certainly than butterflies, and where we can really begin to make a difference by recorders recording in particular ways. The ask within this project is have a look at the map. It's a map which is interactive. It's updated daily from the records in iRecord. And the ask is, can you make the pink squares green? Pink squares have only been visited in 1 year. Green have been visited in more than 1 year, or at least they've got records from more than 1 year. And the reason that this is important is because the sort of trend modelling we do with these occupancy type of data in UKCH requires us to use data from sites which have been visited in more than 1 year. And so if you visit a site that's only been visited once in the past, that's great. You get sort of 2 records for your money, and it's included in the data set for trend analysis. So that's really superb. But actually, as we've been reviewing this and getting feedback from people, it's been really positive. But some people have been saying, actually, I'm really incentivized to record in the blank spaces. The trouble is that you look at some of these maps and there are so many blank spaces. The big question is then, how on earth do you choose where in the blank spaces to record? And this is where the Decide project comes in. So I just put this up to really emphasize that this is it's quite a big project, but it's a project which draws on so many different disciplines, not just ecology and citizen science, but we're drawing on expertise from social science, from computer science, data science, and visualization science. There's a whole load of different expertise which is brought together within this project, with butterfly conservation as one of the key partners. Across this project, co-design with recorders has been at the heart of it. We've been looking to do this development with recorders and for recorders right from the start. So as we've been exploring this, we've been thinking about, well, what's the need? What is the need? How do we make records more useful? So the thing is that we have got good information, especially for things like butterflies and moths, for large scale trends for reporting. So we know what's happening at a national scale. We know that also, if we want to look at a site level, we need records. We need records for individual sites to make good decisions about management. There's a scale in between. There's this regional scale. And as we've talked with potential data users, what they say is that they lack some of these comprehensive and fine scale maps of natural capital, of biodiversity, to inform their decision making. As we've talked to recorders, what we've found from them, and we've done some quite in-depth interviews with a range of different recorders of different levels of expertise, what they say is that they lack tools to guide their recording. Sometimes they want to go out and simply enjoy nature and enjoy recording for its own sake. Sometimes they want to go out and see special species at a nature reserve, but sometimes they want to go out and really want to make a difference with their recording. And so you've got this problem that you could look at dot maps, for instance, but we don't know that the gaps in between the places are those places that have been visited, where the species has been looked for, or not. And that's tricky. And even if we look at a 1 kilometre square, actually, there's a lot of variation of habitat within a 1 kilometre square. And so we've been looking at these much finer scale opportunities down to the 100 metre square, so the 1 hectare square. So one of the solutions that we've looked at in order to explore this a bit further is using modelled distributions. And what this does is we statistically, we take a whole load of different variables, climate, habitat, Earth observation, and we combine that with the raw data of a particular species. And that gives us a predicted distribution. Crucially, it also gives us a predicted uncertainty. And so we can identify those places where we've got greatest uncertainty in the distribution, and where more records, therefore, can actually help us to improve these models. So we can do this for many, many species. And of course, one of the aims of this project is partly to improve these models, to make these models better and better, more realistic and more useful. But what we do is we then sort of stack together all these different levels of uncertainty from across many, many different species. And so that gives us this sort of grid, this diagram or map, really, of where the models are most uncertain. And we can combine that then with the places, knowledge of where observations have already been made. And that gives us this layer of where it's best to collect new observations. This is the recording priority, as we call it. And so we've brought this all together in an interactive tool, the Decide tool, which is updated with the records that people have put into iRecord and iSpot on, it will be a daily basis. And so the ask is this: do you want to discover new places to record wildlife in your area? Do you want to go to different places beyond the ones where you've gone in the past and others have gone in the past? So you can explore this Decide tool. It shows those places with the highest priority for recording to answer this particular question of improving these spatial distribution models. Of course, there might be other other ways of thinking about priorities for recording, but this has been the focus within this particular project. And so you can then have a look at the map. The colours show the recording priorities, and you can click on a button to get suggestions, and that gives you some pins, and those are based on places where it's high recording priority, but also places that are accessible. So we've combined that with footpath maps, things like this. You can get pop-out text. So we've done all of this for butterflies and day-flying moths, with nocturnal moths to come. And what we're encouraging people to do is to go to these places and use their existing recording tools, sending records to county recorders, ideally via iRecord, and they can be incorporated within these data sets. As I said, co-design has been really, really important. And so we encourage people to explore it and to give feedback via the gold button that's present on the screen. And also to join the mailing lists. And in particular, the co-design mailing list is something which we've got so that we can send out occasional polls or occasional questions, particularly when we're interested in key design decisions within the future iterations of the tool. Coming in 2020, we're going to be working to include nocturnal moths. And as part of that, we're going to be working with volunteers in Yorkshire and in London to do some targeted recording with these low-cost LED moth traps. So that's something that I think is really exciting. The thing is that if you've got a moth trap, a cheap one like this, where actually would you go that's not in your garden? These are battery operated. Well, we're hoping that actually using the Decide tool will give people a really good indication as to where these traps are best put for an evening or for overnight. And then we've also got this other component to the project. And we've been thinking about this in terms of encouraging more recording and how we can effectively give feedback to recorders. What we want to do is give feedback to people that's really relevant and appealing and actionable. I think that's something that within the biological recording community, we've probably not been great at doing. But we'd like to run this 4-month experiment. And so what we can do is we can take, for those people who sign up, we can take your recent records in iRecord and iSpot and give you personalized newsletters about the value of your recording. And we're going to be trying out a range of different things, some which are more about text, or some which are more about diagrams, some which emphasize different sorts of traits. And we'd love to get your feedback and to explore and to see which types of messages are going to be most appealing and most relevant to you. We haven't got this ready for sign up just yet, but if you join the mailing list or watch social media or various things like this as we come into this summer, then you'll be able to find out how to join. And we'd love you to encourage other people to join too. We said that we've got this, the engagement with data users. And so this is something that we've been doing as well, developing this. We've actually been prototyping this over the course of the winter to explore this. And we believe that these sorts of maps are going to be really valuable for thinking about these questions of biodiversity net gain within local nature recovery strategies. This is this sort of regional scale vision for supporting biodiversity within counties and local authorities. It should be a way, we hope, of predicting important sites that we might want to particularly protect in key ways when there are key decisions to be made about management, and using Earth observation to evaluate impact and change over time and its impact on biodiversity. So all of this is really exciting as well. So I hope that's given you a bit of insight into this project. Decide, it's about recording nature where it matters. We've got these two big asks, both to you as butterfly enthusiasts, but also we'd love you to spread the word as well. So try out the tool, give feedback, spread the word, let other people know about it, and give their feedback as well as we continue to make these design decisions over the course of the coming year. and join the mailing list in order to find out when to join this experiment about getting your personalized data story newsletters. I think there's so much exciting potential within this project, so we'd love to have your involvement in different ways. So thank you so much, and if you have any questions, I'm sorry I can't be with you, but Richard or Zoe, I'm sure will be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Well, I would be happy to answer them, but we're well over time. So again, if you have any questions about anything that you've heard this morning, or any ideas or questions that has sparked in you, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will try and attend to them there. So thanks very much to all the speakers in this first part of the meeting. Really fascinating, packed with information, lot to take in, really fascinating, hearing about how our butterflies are faring, and hearing about some of these advances in the way that we can record and monitor butterflies to maximize the value of our efforts as volunteer recorders. So I'm going to say that we should have a break now, and suggest that you come back at 11:40, so that's just under 15 minutes, or just after 11:40. Have a 15-minute break, and then we'll carry on with some guest speakers, our broader topics away from purely recording and monitoring, which I'm sure will be really fascinating. Okay, see you in 15 minutes. Hopefully people are coming back. The number of people is going up again. So I think we will make a start again in a moment. Hopefully our speakers, our guest speakers, are ready for this second part of the meeting, because we've got 3 really interesting talks lined up for you from guest speakers. As mentioned earlier this morning, the first part of the meeting this morning was around sort of providing feedback to you about the recording and monitoring projects that many of you take part in, all that fantastic effort and recording, what it goes to show, and indeed how recording itself and monitoring are developing with new technology. And then the guest speakers now will broaden that picture, if you like, tell us a bit about exciting discoveries in the world of butterflies, research, conservation work, that kind of thing. And the first talk proves to be, or promises to be, absolutely fantastic. The Painted Lady is one of the world's great migratory creatures, and has been a source of much mystery over the centuries, or over the decades, as to its sudden appearance and disappearance here in the UK. And I'm delighted that we're now joined by Constanti Stefanescu from Catalonia, who is the world's greatest expert. I'll give you a big billing here, Constanti. Constanti's been at the forefront of research to unravel the mysteries of this great migration over the past number of years. So over to you, Constanti.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this meeting. Let me share my screen. Okay, it works.
Yeah, that's not your title slide, I don't think, but it's certainly on the screen.
That's well,
there we go. That's perfect. Great.
I am Constanti Stefanescu, working at the Natural Science Museum of Granollers, where I have been coordinating the Catalan butterfly monitoring scheme for almost 30 years. But also I've been working quite a lot on the Painted Lady, and today I will speak about that. Well, butterfly migration is a very widespread phenomenon, and a very recent review has shown that butterfly migrants occur at every biogeographical region of the world. Between 2 and 12% of the species in each region are migratory, with prevalence in migration in periods and less so on blues and skippers. It's possible, however, that these figures that I show you in this picture are not completely true, because the effort of knowledge of sampling differs quite a lot between regions, and especially it's possible that in the future it will be shown that migratory species are more abundant in the tropics than is currently assumed. Anyway, there are two well-known butterfly migrants. One is the monarch, of course, and the other one is the painted lady. And in this talk, I will focus on this later species in the Western Palearctic. Well, although the migratory behavior of the painted lady has been known for centuries, and it was clear that in Europe the butterflies arrive in spring and summer coming from the south, no systematic data was available until the establishment of the butterfly monitoring schemes across Europe. So BMS networks with hundreds of recording sites where butterflies are counted every week all through the season are now spread over most of Europe and provide a huge amount of data that is very helpful to understand the population dynamics of these species. These BMS, for example, allow to reconstruct in good detail the colonization of Europe every year. And for instance, in this graph on the right, you can see the distribution of painted lady counts in Catalonia, in the Netherlands, and in the UK, based on data of 25 years of counts. So here you can see the different peaks of abundance, the different regions that correspond to waves of migration, and also to the movements of the individuals emerging in one region to another region. Well, today I will give an overview of what we have learned about the ecology of migration of the painted lady in recent years, and I will focus on the 5 different subjects. First, I will talk about the relationship between winds and migration. Then, based mainly on my work in Morocco, I will talk about the return migration to the African continent every autumn. I then will discuss about what we currently know about the wintering grounds of the painted lady in Africa. And then I will conclude with a brief discussion on the importance of migration at the ecosystem level, and we'll finish by pointing what are the reasons why butterflies and the painted lady in particular migrate. Well, all records of sudden invasions of painted ladies in Europe already suggested that these migrations were related to African winds, quite often carrying large amounts of Saharan dust. In the right, you can see one of such episodes when winds are carrying large quantities of dust coming from the Sahara. One good example of this possible relationship was found in 1879, when there was a big year of migration of painted ladies in Europe, and particularly in Spain and France. There were vividly records and descriptions of the phenomenon on local journals, and here you can see, for example, one of the pictures that were provided to describe this phenomenon. In 2007, using data from the Catalan butterfly monitoring scheme, we tried to analyze formally if there was a relationship between winds, African winds, and the arrival of migratory waves. And this work really confirmed that there is indeed a statistical association between both phenomena. We went further then, and we apply what we call a source receptor model for identifying the origin of migrants in these situations, assuming passive wind-borne transport. Although this model is clear simplification of the reality, because butterflies are not absolutely passive when they are flying, empirical work in one of the areas that were predicted, Morocco, fully confirmed that this region offers excellent conditions for breeding at the predicted time. There are many, we found many sites offering abundant larval resources, such as different species of thistles and mallows. Also, traveling across the country, we found many spots supporting larval populations, including one small area that was under 2 hectares, but where literally thousands and thousands of pupa were hanging from the low vegetation at the time that butterflies were emerging in their thousands. We estimated that this tiny spot was producing about 200,000 painted ladies. So all these findings were clear support that there is a real association between winds and migrations in the painted lady, but definitive confirmation was provided by radar data. In particular, it was very useful, the vertical looking radar in Rothamsted that was run by Jason Chapman, that show that large numbers of painted ladies arrived in the UK in the massive invasion in 2009, flying with tailwinds at altitudes that range from several tens of meters to up to more than 1,000 meters. The concentration of the butterflies was recorded between 200 and 400 meters. And we also realized that during the autumn, at the end of the summer and during the autumn, these massive flights at high elevation were recorded again, this time in a southward direction. It's interesting to note that in the autumn, butterflies tended to migrate at higher elevation than in the spring, and this is probably one of the reasons why it's so difficult to see above ground migration of painted ladies in the autumn. We had also another nice confirmation of the wind-borne migration of the painted lady with a Finnish radar that show that a cloud of painted ladies that here can be seen as small red spots. We are leaving from the continent and crossing the Baltic Sea at 500 meters of elevation with tailwinds, but suddenly they turned back and came back to the land from where they had departed to land because the wind changed in direction and started to blow northward. So these radar findings were important because up to that moment it was completely assumed that painted ladies migrate at ground level. Now we know that at least a substantial part of the travel usually takes place at high altitude with tailwinds. Well, let's talk now of another central aspect of migration of the painted lady, which is the existence of return flights to the African continent and at the end of the summer and in autumn. During the last 15 years, we have carried regular field work in Morocco, mostly in different parts of the country that provides a clear picture of the importance of southern migration in this region. Painted ladies arrive in spectacular numbers by the end of September and throughout October. And then they spread in Morocco, but they clearly prefer traditional agricultural habitats where there is water supply and the host plants and nectar sources are available. You can see here the typical oasis with palm plantations, which is one of the main habitats to find painted ladies in autumn in Morocco. Here you can see another picture of one of these oases. And one very important thing in this habitat is that nectar is fully available. Particularly, there are many small plots of alfalfa, which is one of the preferred flowers for the painted lady, and that's one of the reasons why they concentrate there. There are also two yellow composite that are very common in some parts of Morocco. One is Berbecina encelioides in the picture. The other one is Inula viscosa. And on the plots where these flowers are abundant, you can see thousands and thousands of butterflies nectaring all the time. When the butterflies arrive, mating behavior becomes extremely conspicuous. For example, it's very spectacular to see the hill-topping behavior in the afternoon that is recorded almost at any hill in the country. In some of these hills, you can even see tens of males fighting spectacularly in acrobatic flights for hours sometimes, the last 2-3 hours in the afternoon. This territorial behavior can be seen also in the oasis, and if you are lucky enough, you even can find some mating pairs sometimes. One very important aspect that remained completely understood in the painted lady ecology was the relationship between migration and reproduction. In some migratory species, it has been well established that migration takes place before reproduction, which is technically known as the oogenesis fly syndrome. In the last years, in collaboration with my colleague Christer Wiklund, we have investigated whether the painted lady conforms to this syndrome. For this aim, what we did was to collect a large number of females, both in Morocco and in Spain, and we recorded the wing wear as a surrogate of the age of the butterfly. So here you can see butterflies very fresh in category 1, and on the last row, butterflies very old and worn in the category 5. If you see what we did with this butterfly was to dissect the abdomen of the females in search of the spermatophores that the male transferred to the female during the copula, looking for evidence of copulation. As you can see in this graph, all young females, categories 1 and 2, fresh females, invariably were virgin and had not mate. It was as they age and became categories 2 and 3 that they started to mate, and all butterflies already had mated. This pattern indeed is rather exceptional among butterflies, because the females of most species mate very soon after emergence, and is indeed very rare to find virgin females in the wild. This curious pattern for the painted lady is explained because migration is concentrated in the first period of the individual life when the butterflies are not sexually active. So what we have found is that based on this evidence that migration lasts only a few days, in most cases probably less than 1 week, which is the time in the lab that the butterflies remain sexually active, remain sexually inactive after they are born. So as soon the butterflies arrive in the destination areas, they mate and females rapidly start to oviposit on the host plants. In the particular case of the Maghreb in the north of Africa, the main host plant in the autumn is mallow. That is a plant that can reach high densities in agricultural areas. In fact, sometimes enormous numbers of eggs can be found on the leaves of mallows. For example, I remember once that I counted above 1,500 eggs in a very small plot of 10 per 5 meters with mallows. And in some of the leaves of these plants, you could even find more than 50 eggs. So you have an idea of the importance of these host plants. In October and November, then caterpillars can be easily found on the plants. First young instars, then large instars, making these conspicuous nests, as you can see on the left at the bottom. And one of the ideas that you get when you have been working in these areas is that the painted ladies show an impressive ability to locate the areas where the host plants are concentrated. Even in big cities like Tanger, in this picture, where a small area can represent an ideal breeding habitat because of the abundance of mallows. In fact, in October, November, painted ladies are everywhere in North Africa. Even in the markets, in the local markets like this one, you can see adults that are nectaring, sipping the sugar of dates when the flowers are not available. And even in the markets, you can find caterpillars on the leaves of mallows that are sold for food, for salads. I remember once that in one of these bunches of mallows, it was plenty of pig larvae. Even if the painted lady is clearly concentrated in anthropogenic habitats at that time, if you travel to the most arid and remote places in the south of the country, like this one in the Anti-Atlas, you can see painted ladies in abundance. In this kind of landscape, the painted ladies concentrate on the acacia trees, which at that time are in blossom, at least in most years. And there is a local plant which is called the desert nettle on the pictures below, that is very attractive for painted ladies, and you can find thousands of eggs when wandering in these seemingly inhospitable habitats. However important the Maghreb is for autumn migration, recent work by Gerard Talavera, south of the Sahara, has revealed the surprising result that the Sahel and the tropical savanna, which is this white band between 10 and 20 degrees of latitude, is also supporting an important breeding habitat for the species. At that time is the end of the rainy season in the Sahel and the tropical savanna, and the whole area become plentiful of resources. So the painted ladies arrive in this area at the right moment with optimal conditions for breeding. that the butterflies recording in the Sahel and also in the Maghreb at this time are of European origin has been confirmed using what we call stable isotopes from an extensive sample. The ratio between hydrogen and the main stable isotope deuterium follows a regular latitudinal pattern in the water from rain, which translates into the plants and of course also into the tissues of the caterpillars feeding on these plants and eventually on the chitin of the butterfly wings. Although that's what we know for the autumn migration that has been studied quite intensively in the last years, but there is still some mystery about where the butterflies are in the middle of the winter. Although massive migration and breeding, as you have seen, occurs both in Morocco and in the Sahel. For example, in Morocco, if you go in winter, the population levels of painted ladies are chronically very low. In fact, the country is quite cold in winter. In the Sahel, the season now becomes completely dry, and then the whole environment is hostile for further breeding at this time. So a recent climate niche model made by the team by Gerard Talavera predicted that the bulk of the populations in the winter period should be concentrated in the tropical region of Africa, as you can see in these pictures. However, the painted lady is very rarely found in tropical areas and is clearly a species preferring more desertic areas. In fact, recent work in collaboration with Gao Hu, with Jason Chapman, with David Roy and others points to an alternative scenario. Last year, we carried out an extensive analysis of 25 years of BMS data to develop a population model that predicts the population levels of the painted ladies in Europe based on different climatic variables in Africa. We related the population levels recorded each spring in Catalonia with NDVI values in the different bioclimatic regions in Africa in winter and spring. NDVI is a satellite measure of the greenness of the vegetation. So it gives an idea of the availability of green vegetation in a certain spot. The results indicate that the condition of the vegetation in January and February in what we call the subtropical savanna, which is the layer below the Sahel and above the tropical forest, is what predicts the values, the levels that we record in spring in Catalonia, in the Mediterranean. NDVI values in the Maghreb in March, April were also important, but by themselves cannot explain the recorded abundances in Europe. So we believe that when winter conditions in the tropical savanna are better than average, substantial numbers of painted ladies can develop, and after crossing the Sahara, seed degeneration developing in the Maghreb in the spring, prior to the migration into Europe. Would like now to briefly discuss what's the role or the importance of migration at the ecosystem level. And well, it has to be noted that painted ladies arriving in a given region represent a substantial amount of nutrients that may return to the soil when the butterflies die, or taken up by a range of predators as you can see in these pictures. In some years, the figures involved are substantial and can have an important effect on the local food webs. For example, in May and June of 2009, the good year for the painted ladies in Europe, it was estimated that about 11 million of butterflies crossed the skies in South UK. In Morocco, probably numbers are even higher than this every autumn. And we have direct evidences of local specialization by different predators on this kind of resources. Probably the most surprising, striking example is provided by the Saharan frogs that sometimes specialize on feeding on painted ladies during the October. These frogs live in the streams in the Anti-Atlas, and in these streams sometimes there are big concentrations of Inula viscosa, which is this yellow composite that is very attractive to painted ladies, and frogs can spend the whole day catching these butterflies there. Maybe some of you have seen this, there was a very nice documentary some years ago that's called Butterflies, a Very British Obsession. And one of the bits of this documentary was a filming of this phenomenon that we were able to see in this area in the Anti-Atlas. When there is this massive migration in the autumn, also many butterflies become killed, crashed by cars in the roads of the whole Morocco. And we have seen that there is a variety of birds that patrol all the time along these roads, catching the killed butterflies. So that's another example. And of course, there are some birds that have specialized on catching butterflies alive. And probably the bee-eater is the most good example of this. And in fact, it's quite easy to find the butterflies bearing a sign of birds attacks in the wings, like you can see in these pictures. Well, to conclude, I would like to discuss very shortly the reasons for why the painted lady and other butterflies migrate. The year-round spatial distribution of the painted lady is highly predictable. Even if there are strong oscillations in the population levels between years, in a given region, the timing of the arrival of the painted lady varies only within a very narrow margin. The same happens with other migrants, like, for example, this example, which is the different species of milkweed butterflies that every year undertake very spectacular migrations in the south of India between the northeast and the southwest. These migrations, what allow the butterflies is to synchronize their arrival with the availability of ephemeral resources that are present in relation to the annual variation of climate. In the case of the painted lady, we find that the migration is synchronized with the growing season of plants, but also with the oscillations of temperature. Instead of avoiding the bad season by entering in diapause, like most butterflies do, painted ladies have adopted a strategy that is based on permanent movement to those regions that offer good conditions for breeding. Yet another reason why migration is a good strategy is in a continuous breeder like the painted lady is the avoidance of the increasing impact of parasitoids whose populations build up when the host remains in the same area for successive generations. Here you can see the parasitoid assemblage of the painted lady in Spain and in Morocco. Is a very rich assemblage comprising several species of parasitoids, mainly some tachinid flies, and also different wasps of several families that lay the eggs on the caterpillars and on the pupa of the pentid lady, and can produce very serious mortality in the populations. Particularly important is Cotesia vanessae. You can see an adult on the left, and also a caterpillar at the moment that all the grubs that were eating the tissues of the caterpillar body come out from the larva and kill the larva and start to make the cocoon around the moribund caterpillar. In this case, we believe that migration is also a way to escape from this growing pressure of natural enemies. Well, yeah, to conclude, I would say that although there are many aspects that still require to be studied to fully understand the migratory ecology of the species, what we know now is that the pentid lady every year engages in a spectacular migration between the subtropical Africa and the Nordic country, in a band that extends for more than 6,000 kilometers, and this is made twice in the season by the succession of 6-8 generations. And this represents at the moment the longest migration that is carried out by an insect. I would like also to note that it's important that a substantial part of the knowledge that you can see in these pictures derives from the monitoring data that is collected within the butterfly monitoring schemes through the enthusiastic work of people like you all. So let me conclude by acknowledging your contribution to this whole story. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Constanti. That was a brilliant talk and absolutely fascinating research, as you say, building on the efforts of people, volunteers going out and walking transects in Catalonia, in the UK, in other parts of Europe, but also the amazing detective work, you know, analyzing the chemicals in the wings of butterflies to work out where they grew up as caterpillars, looking at the predators. I love the frogs. That's just an amazing little natural history aside to the whole story. But yeah, it's wonderful work that you've done over many years, and I'm sure all of the transect walkers here today are delighted that you've been able to use their data to work out these mysteries.
Okay.
So thanks very much for joining us. I'm going to move on because we're past time. So thanks again, Constanti. And we're now going to hear about some conservation work in a pre-recorded talk by one of our butterfly conservation colleagues, Jen Gilbert, talking about the Limestone Living Legacies project. Zoe, are you able to run that for us, please?
I am.
Looks promising.
Oh, come on.
Right, thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
Sorry, I can't actually be.
Oh. Has it stopped making a sound?
Yes, it has. I think when you muted, it stopped.
Yeah, how annoying. Right, hold on, let's try again. Stop share. I might have to not mute. Okay.
With you in person today, but I'm really pleased to be able to give this talk about our Back from the Brink project, Limestone's Living Legacies, which ran for 4 years here in the Cotswolds and finished just last year. I'm going to give you a bit of information about some of the survey work that we did and all the volunteer help that we had over the 4 years, but also have a look at some of the conservation work that we did for a couple of our butterfly species as well. So Limestone's Living Legacies was based, as I say, in the Cotswolds, circled there in red. This is a map of all the Back from the Brink projects. There were 19 in total. And we were one of what was called the integrated projects, so working across a number of different species and on a large sort of landscape scale. It was focusing on the Cotswolds unimproved limestone grassland. This is a really special habitat, and the Cotswolds is a real stronghold for this particular type of grassland. But it used to cover 40% of this total area back in the 1930s. And sadly today there's been a huge decline, as there has been with much of our wildflower grasslands, and it stands at less than 1.5% now, which is really sad to see. And as you can imagine, with any decline of habitat, as you well know, you get the decline in the species that rely on it. So as I say, this was a cross-taxa project, and before it started back in 2017, during the development phase, lots of data was gathered to help determine the species that we were going to focus on, and also determine the areas within the Cotswolds that we were also going to target our work. So data was gathered from local record centres, from our national partners, but also a lot of data was gathered from Butterfly Conservation's own butterfly monitoring scheme and butterflies for the new Millennium data sets as well. And we were given a target species list of 30 individual species, and as I say, we weren't just working on one species or just butterflies and moths. We were working across a whole suite of different species that all in one way or another rely on this particular limestone grassland. So I haven't got time to list them all, but this is just a small subset of our 30 species to give you an idea of the type of species we were focusing on. So we had the large blue, greater horseshoe bat, pasqueflower, ruderal bumblebee, adder, and rock rose pot beetle there as well. So quite a mix of different species, but all have suffered declines. Some are only just hanging on in a few sites, and as I say, all rely on this type of grassland. So I was community engagement officer for the project, and one of my the biggest part of my role was to get people involved, get volunteers involved, and actually survey these target species to actually see how they're faring. So as I say, we'd used that development time to understand where they were known to be at the beginning of the project, but we wanted to get a more up-to-date idea of how they were doing. So working with our national partners, we ran a series year on year of training courses for a number of our target species. So this is just gives you a little flavour of some of the workshops that we ran. So top left there, we're looking for Duke of Burgundy. Top right, with Bug Life, looking for rock rose pot beetle. Bottom left, we're looking for learning how to identify bumblebee species, and in particular the two target species we had on the list. And then bottom right, with Plant Life there, looking at how to survey for juniper. So we ran a number of these workshops, and they were always really well attended, which was absolutely fantastic. And then people would then sign up to survey a site or several sites for these species. So we got a huge amount of recording effort done off the back of these training courses. And I just want to go into some of the results of some of these surveys. And one of our other species that I hadn't yet mentioned was the rugged oil beetle, one of two beetles on the target list. And we knew that the Cotswolds was a stronghold for this particular particular beetle, but we didn't know how important these grasslands were. So working with Bug Life, we ran the training courses, and we trained people up into how to identify this particular species, as there are several oil beetle species that we have in the UK, and we taught people how to go about surveying for them, which is pretty simple, as you can see here. But it's quite different. It's completely opposite, in fact, to what you might be used to with butterfly recording. This beetle is nocturnal and it's actually active during the autumn and the winter. So very different, and as you can imagine is very under-recorded because of that. There's not many people going out in the middle of winter after dark with torches looking for a very small black beetle. So, but the take-up was fantastic. We had a lot of people coming out to help us with these surveys, and I think in total we surveyed 26 sites. Some of them we already knew had beetles, but the vast majority were completely new sites. We were trying to see if there were more sites we could find these beetles on. And when we started, this was the map of the sites that were already known. So we knew of 8 sites within the Cotswolds boundaries. As I say, we did 26 individual sites, and we added all of these to the list. We went from 8 sites, known sites within the Cotswold boundaries, to 20. So we added 12 new sites. We also added 3 outside the Cotswold boundaries there. And it really gave us a better idea of just how important the Cotswolds, the Cotswold limestone grasslands are for this particular rare species. I mean, it's still a nationally scarce beetle, but as you can see, and in particular when we look at some of the results that we got, even on some of these sites it can actually be more common or even abundant, but still nationally scarce. So that really gave us a better idea of just how important this area was for this species. We're also able to, as well as mapping the distribution across a large area, we could then look at mapping the species within a site as well. So this is a site called Painswick Beacon, and as we're surveying, we're taking grid references of all the beetles that we find. And that allows me to plot onto a map, onto GIS, where these beetles are. And that allows us to give to the site manager a map of exactly where, well, any species, but in this case, obviously the rugged beetle, is on their site. And as you can see here, they're very much concentrated on the southeast, sort of facing ramparts, really a hot spot of the site for the beetle here. And that means we can obviously then target the management for them where we know they are. So some really important data gathered for this particular species. Moving on to one of our butterfly species, the Duke of Burgundy. A lot of work had been done for the Duke of Burgundy over the years by butterfly conservation, by the Gloucestershire branch as well, and many other organisations, in fact, in the Cotswolds. So we had a pretty good idea of where they were, but we still need to keep an eye on how they're doing, of course. So we ran training courses in how to identify not just the adult, but also the larval feeding damage, which is really distinctive. And that's what they're all looking at in the top photo there. In 2014, a county-wide butterfly Duke of Burgundy survey had been run, and we aimed to repeat that in 2018. So with the help of newly trained up volunteers, but a lot of our Gloucestershire branch volunteers, we surveyed a total of 43 sites. And comparing as best we could with 2014 data, we'd found 28 sites with dukes present, and six of those appeared to have decreased, 5 increased, and 7 stayed the same. So we're starting to get a handle on how individual populations were doing. In 2019, we did some more training, and then we targeted a smaller number of sites to get, again, an idea of how the population was still getting on. 16 had dukes present, and again, it appeared that 3 had decreased, 2 increased, and 7 stayed the same. So, as you are well aware, with this ongoing survey effort, that allows us to track how those individual populations are getting on. So moving on to one of our plant species, we had several on the project. This is juniper. We worked with Plant Life to run training courses on how to identify it. It's fairly easy to identify juniper, but it's suffered such declines. We wanted to really get an idea of how it was doing on sites where we had known pretty good populations. So we carried out surveys, full surveys at 2 sites. And when I say full surveys, it wasn't just counting how many plants there were, it was doing assessments of the status of each plant. So first of all, if it's male or female, how what stage of life it was at, if there was any damage to it, and so that we could actually tailor the management on the site to best look after these existing juniper bushes. One of the reasons that juniper has really declined is lack of management of grasslands. So those berries need to fall onto open bare soil, and when you don't have the right management or the right grazing, the grass builds up, and you just get that sort of thick layer of thatch and no open bare ground. So the berries can't then germinate. So one of the ways to help this is by creating scrapes. And we created scrapes at 2 sites, one there where we had volunteers doing it by hand, and another much larger scrape where we got some heavy machinery in to do that. And they were both created under mature female bushes, and again to basically open up that soil so that those berries can actually fall direct onto the bare ground and hopefully germinate. And it was really great to see that within 1 year, that scrape in the photo in the middle, created in 2018, when we went back and did our full survey at this site, we found that scrape had already had 28 new seedlings come up. So it just shows how quickly an effect that just opening up the soil can have for this particular plant. Just coming back to another of our beetle species, this is the rock rose pot beetle. And at the beginning of the site, we knew that it was present at 2 sites in Gloucestershire. And another one was thought to have gone extinct. So 2 known sites and 1 extinct site. Working with bug life, we ran training workshops, to train people how to identify this beetle, how to go about looking for it. And in 2018, we ran our first surveys, and unfortunately, as you can see, we found no beetles at all, which was slightly concerning. In 2019, we ran the training again, and people went out surveying, and fortunately, we managed to find 1 beetle at one of the known sites called Stinchcombe Hill, and 3 at the second known site, which is a privately owned site. Not too far away, they're very close together. So this was really good. I mean, not big numbers, but at least we knew they were still there. In 2020, we did the training again, and things got a lot more interesting. We found 9 beetles at Stinchcombe Hill, and a huge amount, about 69 individual sightings at this second privately owned site. Which was absolutely fantastic. And given that this beetle is actually only known from around about 5 or 6 sites in total nationally, this probably makes this site the best in the country for this particular species. So really, really important site. It actually got even more exciting that year because this site where we thought the beetle was extinct, it was found at again, which was absolutely brilliant. So a couple of our volunteers who, funny enough, were actually going out to look for large blues, actually found the first rock rose pot beetle there since 1985. So really, really encouraging and fantastic to see that it was still hanging on there, even though nobody had seen it for so long. And just to wrap up on the surveys, and to give a really big thank you to all our volunteers, I just wanted to show just how much effort they'd all put into the project. So our volunteers did a total of 478 surveys across the 4 years of the project, which is quite staggering, really. Not just on the species that I've already touched on, but there was also surveys done for adders, for our other plant species like pasque flower, for the bumblebees, and also for our bat species as well. So, you know, we really couldn't have done anywhere near that without help of our volunteers. And now I just wanted to move on to some of the on-the-ground work that we did for a couple of other butterfly species. So, as I mentioned, large blue was on the list, and our aim for this butterfly on the project was to reintroduce it to one new site. So several reintroductions have happened over previous years in Gloucestershire, and we wanted to bolster that population by reintroducing to another new site to really help you know, the individual populations be able to move throughout the landscape. But of course, whenever you're doing any reintroduction, you've got to make sure that the site, you've chosen the site well, you've checked that it's in good condition, and if it's not, you want to get it into good condition, ready for the reintroduction. So there was a lot of work pre the reintroduction done. There were a couple of sites where we hoped we could get reintroductions done, but they needed a bit of effort in terms of grazing. So new grazing regimes were put in place on this particular site here, which is a site called Reproduction. The slopes which were the most suitable for the large blue had become fairly rank and become undergrazed, just because the cows didn't really want to go down the slopes. So by using some electric fencing paddocks, we were able to concentrate the grazing where it was needed. We also introduced, installed new water troughs at another site, all with the aim of getting the vegetation to the right level for this particular butterfly. And we also did some larval food planting of wild thyme and marjoram, which are the two food plants of the large blue. These were to support some of the previous reintroductions as well. And once all this work was done and the reintroduction site deemed in good condition, ready for the large blue, we could go ahead with the reintroductions. And these were done by our colleagues David Simcox and Sarah Meredith, and that's Sarah there actually putting out some of the large blue caterpillars onto one of the reintroduction sites. So how did we get on? Well, I said we were aiming for one reintroduction. We actually managed to reintroduce the large blue to 3 new sites in the Cotswolds, which was fantastic. Over 2,500 individual larvae were released, and the first one that we did was to a site called Painswick Beacon. So that was done in 2018 with the help of branch volunteers and other volunteers who managed the site. We did follow-up surveys in 2019, and it turned out that they had emerged. We got good number of adults, and we also found that there were good numbers of eggs being laid across the site as well. So initially a good start to this reintroduction. In 2020, we repeated the surveys, our volunteers helped again, and we started to see that it seemed that they're starting to spread to other areas within the site as well, which is really encouraging. In 2019, we then did a second reintroduction to Reproduction. This is a site owned by the National Trust. And obviously 2020 was somewhat interrupted, but fortunately lockdown was lifted by the time we needed to get out and see if this had been successful. And our volunteers did manage to get out, and it was quite staggering the number of adults that were being seen on a regular basis. So we found large numbers of adults flying, and again large numbers of eggs being laid across the site as well. And then last year, with repeat surveys, we found that they had successfully bred. So we're still going to be keeping an eye on all these sites just to see how they continue to get on. So, but initially both sites looking really quite promising. As I say, we did do a third site. We managed to do this in 2020 to another site in the Stroud Valleys, which hasn't been made public yet. But initial results from last year again look really promising. The butterflies emerged, and there were good numbers of sightings there as well. And so I just wanted to finish off mentioning the marsh fritillary, which is another of our target butterfly species. When we started the project, we knew of the one known breeding site in Gloucestershire, or the best site for them in Gloucestershire. And our original plan had been to do a translocation from this site, a bit like the large blue, to another site in the nearby vicinity. And a lot of work had gone on prior to the project and then during the project to identify the best, most suitable site for this translocation. Unfortunately, even though we did select the site, we had to put the translocation on hold, and that's really because the marsh fritillary has what is called a boom and bust life cycle. So it can do really well one year and then can pretty much crash the next year, which is what happened pretty much at the start of our project. And it is building back up. It's still there at this site. It's still doing pretty well, but just not at a level that we could safely take from and move to a new site. So we concentrated our efforts on a nearby site where they do turn up from time to time and had been previously known to have bred on and off. The site is privately owned, and there's quite a lot of work that needs to be done. It hasn't been grazed for quite a while. It got a bit scrubbed over. So my colleague Julian did a lot of work with volunteers to open up the grassland and try and get it into good condition so that this butterfly will disperse more regularly there and start breeding. And in February 2020, he actually found evidence of breeding at this site. So that's his photo of a larval web that he found there, which was great news to see that it was still breeding there, or had started breeding there again. So yeah, really heartening results. However, there's still more work that I'm still working on with the landowners. They're fantastic supporters of butterfly conservation and what we're trying to do. We've been planting Devil's Bit scabious on the site, so that's the larval food plant of this butterfly, basically to obviously give them more breeding opportunities around the site. And we're also getting grazing organised for this year. So thanks to the National Trust, they're going to be able to bring on their cattle this summer and hopefully get on top of that thick thatch and really get this grassland into better condition so that this butterfly can continue to breed and hopefully set up, you know, a regular breeding colony here as well. So that's pretty much it, but I just wanted to wrap up with just a few last figures to just highlight how important the recording and the volunteers have been for the project. So we trained up 546 people through our workshops and through sort of on-the-job training, and we had 414 individual volunteers come and work with us, which was absolutely staggering. And that equated to 1,123 days of time worked by volunteers, which is an amazing amount. And I think really gets put into perspective when you look at that in terms of years. That actually equates to 3 years worth of time. So, you know, just shows how important you are as volunteers to projects like ours and to butterfly conservation as a whole. We really couldn't achieve anywhere near the amount of work that we can with your help. So thank you very much.
Right, that's great. Lovely talk there. Thanks very much to Jen in her absence for recording that and feeding back on all the wonderful work that she and Julian and all of the huge number of volunteers have contributed there. In the Cotswolds. Really positive conservation stories, not only for butterflies, but for a range of other plants and animals benefiting from our conservation work as well. Right, I know we're running over, but there is one more talk, and again, it's lovely to finish with a positive story, or what certainly seems at the moment to be a positive story. So for our final talk in this year's meeting, I'll introduce Will Langdon, who's going to give you an overview, a summary of what's going on with the large tortoiseshell. Will.
Cool, thanks very much, Richard. I'll just sort my screens out. Can you see that? And see
yeah, that's great.
And nothing else? Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, thanks for that introduction, Richard, and thanks for having me here today. I've been to lots of these talks in the audience before, and it's great to be on the other side today. Really exciting. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the recent records of large tortoiseshells in the UK, as Richard said. Many of you will know that it's a bit of a mysterious butterfly and has been considered extinct in the UK for some time, nearly 50 years, but seems to have enjoyed a little bit of a resurgence in the last couple of years. And so I'll take a little bit of a look at what has happened during this resurgence and engage in some rampant speculation about what's been driving it, and just take you through that. Obviously, it's a butterfly that you can speculate about endlessly, and people have over the years, but I'll try and keep it fairly short and sweet, and maybe we'll have some time for questions at the end. So before we get into the meat of it, kind of main bit of housekeeping is what large tortoiseshells are and what they do. I guess many of you will be familiar with the much commoner small tortoiseshell, but sadly rather few of you will be lucky enough to have seen large tortoiseshells. They look kind of similar, similar colouring and shape, but slightly more ragged large tortoiseshell, slightly rustier colour, and obviously, as the name suggests, significantly bigger, about 20 to 30% larger. And they're actually in different genuses despite the similarity in appearance. So large torts are in the same group as Camberwell beauties, and in common with Camberwell beauties, their ecology is a bit different to small tortoiseshells. They have one generation a year instead of two, and they use deciduous trees for their larvae instead of herbaceous plants. And large tortoiseshells particularly like elms and willows, although larvae have been found on quite a wide variety of plants over the years. And so you kind of think with, using elms and willows are quite common trees really throughout the UK, that the large tortoiseshell might be quite a common butterfly here, or at least might have been before it kind of went mysteriously extinct. And although it was kind of considered widespread by early collectors, south of kind of maybe Yorkshire and North Wales, it's always been a bit erratic. And the early literature is full of tales of the large tortoiseshell appearing in an area and becoming very abundant all of a sudden, and then disappearing just as rapidly as it arrived. And this story kind of continues into the early 20th century, when we started to get a bit more serious about butterfly recording. And you can see these fluctuations in the early records of large tortoiseshells that are held by the Biological Record Centre. There's a big boom at the start of the 1900s, then a long bust, and then another kind of boom in the sort of golden summers of the 1940s, which were great butterfly years, and then another bust that sadly kind of continued basically up to the present day. So after 1950, large torts were really quite rare. And in this period of quite intense butterfly recording, only a handful was seen each year, with the last breeding record in 1983. And for a long time, these were kind of considered probably just to be releases by people who were hoping to turn the large tortoiseshell's fortunes around, and breeding butterflies in captivity and letting them go. But in 2007, just here, it became clear that, maybe they weren't all releases, because there was this massive influx of large tortoiseshells, mainly to the south coast, that seemed likely to be the result of migrants. Lots of butterflies seen in quite a small area in Hampshire and Dorset. And people started to think, okay, maybe, we're getting migrants from the continent, and natural recolonization from Europe, where the butterfly can still be quite common, is maybe a possibility. Sadly, though, as you can see here, that was a bit of a flash in the pan, and normal service kind of resumed after that, until very recently, when again we've seen an awful lot of large tortoiseshells. And so that's what I'll focus on here today. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about what's happened to all of these large tortoiseshells that pitched up in such numbers. But first, we'll take a kind of overall view and think about why they've suddenly appeared in such numbers. So one of the first things that's sort of apparent when you look at maps of where large tortoiseshells were seen in 2019, just here, and 2020, is that they have a kind of southeasterly flavour to them. So normally with large tortoiseshells, if you plot all of the ones that have been seen in the UK in the last 20 years, and also, you know, really powerful comparison is the 2007 influx, they're mostly seen on the south coast, like Dorset and Hampshire are the best counties to see them. So Hampshire, up until 2018, they'd had 74 butterflies. And this kind of spreads on the east coast is kind of unusual that you have in 2019 and 2020. And you can see that in the number of records that the counties on the east coast have. You know, normally Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, Norfolk, quite bad places for large tortoiseshells before 2019 and 2020. But you can see that in 2020, Norfolk was one of the places to be, really, to see large tortoiseshells. So what this kind of suggests is, you know, aside from the fact that we're getting migrants from the continent in these recent influxes, just given the scale of them, it's also that they're probably coming from the east rather than the south, where they've come from maybe in previous years. You know, somewhere maybe like the Low Countries, Belgium and the Netherlands. And indeed, there's been a massive increase in large tortoiseshell sightings in the Low Countries in the last few years. So you can see that it kind of precedes our increase, which was mainly 2019 and 20, sort of starting in 2018 in the Netherlands and Belgium. And also the magnitude is far greater. So I think there's about 120 seen in 2020 here, but you can see that in the Netherlands and Belgium, the numbers are really a lot greater. So suddenly a lot more large tortoiseshells knocking about slightly to the east of us. It's not too surprising that suddenly they started turning up on our east coast. One thing that's quite interesting about the records in the Low Countries that I won't go into in too much detail is that they're seeing quite a lot in spring. So it's kind of normal for large tortoiseshells to be seen in greater numbers in spring, basically because the adults emerge in late summer. They kind of like go around and nectar and fuel up before hibernation for quite a short period, and then they disappear into hibernation for a very long time, and then emerge in the spring when they're much more territorial, and they're quite obvious. They're sitting in sunny spots attacking other butterflies. But the numbers in spring have been much, much higher than the ones in summer, which either suggests that they're more surviving the winter in hibernation, or they're getting migration in the spring. And that's maybe what's driven some of the increase in these countries. And the situation in the UK kind of suggests that we might be getting those spring migrants as well. Oops, sorry, my slides are a bit weird there. So if you compare the distribution of large tortoiseshells in summer and in spring, you can see that they're quite different. If the butterflies that we saw in spring, so spring 2019 here, and spring 2020 were those that had all just arrived the previous summer, you'd kind of expect them to be in the same places. Like obviously they're more obvious in spring, so maybe there'd be more, but instead in the two springs, spring 2019 and 2020, you see these real clusters in the southeast that aren't there in summer. I mean, you look at 2019 versus 2020, this massive wodge in Sussex, which had no large tortoiseshells in the summer, and again, you know, on the coast in Norfolk, which had no large tortoiseshells in summer. And it kind of suggests maybe that these are fresh arrivals happening in spring in the southeast from the Low Countries. And that's what's maybe driving these exceptionally good numbers in 2020 in particular. And that's something that might be facilitated by the weather. Constanti talked about the role of winds, and in spring 2020, there's quite a long period of settled weather and easterly winds in late March and early April that coincides with a lot of these large tortoiseshell sightings. So good numbers to our east, and then good conditions to help them migrate in spring has maybe helped here. And yeah, obviously bit speculative looking at these maps, but the nice thing about spring migration is that actually it has been observed in the last couple of years firsthand. So it's a really cool sighting of this large tortoise shell on a boat in the North Sea in spring 2019, somewhere between the Netherlands and the UK. And then this one that was seen actually arriving in off the sea on the east coast at Flamborough Head in spring 2020. So, you know, we know spring migration is happening because people are seeing it, and this all kind of suggests that it's of quite a large scale and it's maybe contributing to the good numbers that have been seen in the last couple of springs. So yeah, we've got a sense of where these butterflies have come from, and I guess the next question is what they did when they got here. And many of you will know that the most exciting thing that they did was breed for the first time since 1983, which was the last breeding record in the UK when a larva was swept from an elm hedge in North Cornwall. So kind of cast in order of appearance, the first breeding record was in Weymouth in 2020, final instar larva that was found crossing the road. And then a couple of weeks later, I went down to Portland where there'd been a lot of adult sightings, and I was lucky enough to find an old larval web. I actually went back in 2021 with Matthew Oates and Pete Ewers as well, and we found some occupied larval webs with larvae molting into their final instar as well. Then also in 2021, earlier in the spring, this magnificent female was seen egg laying on the Norfolk coast at Sheringham, and then down in the southeast in Sussex, final instar larva was just found wandering around in someone's garden in urban Hastings, quite a surprising sighting. And then in the same county, slightly later in July, an old larval web was found. So one thing that most of these sightings have in common, apart from this exceptional record of the egg-laying female in Norfolk, is that they're kind of mature larvae or webs found in June, at which time of year the webs look kind of like this. These are the ones that we are lucky enough to see on Portland. You've got a great big mass of magnificent orange caterpillars clustered around a branch of the food plant. So these are larvae molting into their final instar. Just here you can see the ones that are slightly bigger and with yellowy, longer spines are the final instars. And they're very big beasts, about the size of your finger almost. And if Frohawk is to be believed, those spines can penetrate the human skin. So they're pretty serious creatures. But having said that, they're actually quite inconspicuous, particularly when they're quite high up in a tree. And they're not necessarily easy to spot. The main giveaway comes about a week or two later when the final instar larvae really go to town and start eating seriously. And they can strip, you know, whole branches of trees almost, leaving these very tattered branches that are quite distinctive. And this feeding damage, you know, it sticks around, and it means that larvae can be found or old webs can be located after the larvae have wandered off to pupate. And then you can kind of confirm the identification by looking for the original egg batch, which stays on the branch for some time, and also the shed larval skins. Obviously, in most cases, these are quite high up in the trees. So these are both from Portland. This was about 6 meters up, and this one was slightly higher, maybe 8 to 10. So it does require a bit of climbing, and you need a willing PhD student with scant regard for their safety to do that for you, really. But yeah, having said that, with the larval webs are easier to locate in June, we did have this amazing record of the egg-laying female in April. So it's not always the case that they're found at that time of year, but it certainly seems that it would be easier to look for them then. And I thought I'd just share the photos of this because it's such a unique and wonderful sighting. That's the female as she was laying her eggs in early April. And that's the freshly laid egg batch. And then they kind of coloured up over the course of a month as the larvae inside matured and hatched in early May. And this is the actual hatching of the eggs, which was captured on camera. It's kind of extraordinary stuff, photographed by James McCallum and Rob Lee here. And then the little larvae kind of wandered off onto a willow leaf. These were on willow, unlike all the other sightings, and still started feeding together. Unfortunately, the keen-eyed among you will see that there are rather fewer larvae in this photo on the right than the one on the left. And unfortunately, these little first instar larvae all disappeared over the course of a week. So this web didn't make it. But it's a wonderful series of photos documenting a really unique sighting. And you can also see just how inconspicuous they really are at this stage. So probably is all about locating those mature larval webs. And the place to be doing that seems to be kind of sunny, sheltered positions. So on the left here is the site where the Norfolk larvae were found, or the eggs. It's a young willow and a sheltered woodland glade. And then these are where I've seen larvae on Portland. So you have elms that are in an old churchyard. They're sheltered on all sides by the trees. And similar here, there's a kind of sheltered nook in a row of elms. Where they're very well protected and sheltered, and in both cases here, south facing, so they get a lot of sun. So that certainly seems to be what the large tortoiseshells like. I think one thing that's really worth noting as well about all of these sightings, with the exception of the Portland ones, which were obviously targeted searches in areas where there'd been a lot of adults, is that they were kind of chance discoveries in areas where lots of adult large tortoiseshells hadn't really been seen. And people didn't necessarily suspect them of breeding nearby. They're all found by people out looking for other things, doing other things. And what that kind of shows, I think, is that, you know, if this butterfly is breeding down the road from you, you're not necessarily going to know about it. They're quite easy to overlook. So I guess, yeah, it could be you that finds the next web. So bear in mind these signs and sort of keep an eye out. And if you do see a large tortoiseshell near you, in suitable breeding habitat, be suspicious and keep an eye out for these larvae. And yeah, just to kind of illustrate that a little bit more as well, I was sent this fabulous video from Suffolk of a large tortoiseshell. Hopefully that's playing for you all now. And what it shows is a female large tortoiseshell soaring around and sort of fussing around the top of an elm hedge in spring, you know, and that's very suggestive of a mated female that's looking to lay eggs. And she probably did go on and lay those eggs somewhere, and there probably were larvae and adults, but there were very few reports from Suffolk and certainly no mention of breeding. So, you know, how many more elm hedges was this scene playing out on, and how many more were overlooked? So, yeah, I guess final question then that everyone wants to know the answer to is, what is the future of this butterfly in the UK? You know, has the recent resurgence been kind of concrete, and will we see a lot more of it? It's really hard to say. I think, you know, this butterfly is notorious for its fluctuations over time, and maybe we're just in a boom phase that will be followed by another bust. Certainly there weren't loads of sightings in summer 2021, despite all of the breeding records. Even on Portland, only one adult was photographed. But having said that, you know, as Mark said earlier, it was quite a poor summer in that June-July period when the large tortoiseshells are active. And so maybe they just weren't very obvious because of the poor weather, and this spring is the real test. And I've been keeping track of sightings of large tortoiseshells on social media and stuff, and by this point in 2020 there were 10 reports on social media, and I'm aware of 8 or 9 so far this year. So, you know, maybe keeping pace, and there are reasons to be optimistic, even though things don't seem to be going too well on Portland. But kind of longer term, I think it's clear that numbers here are very dependent on conditions elsewhere. You know, we owe a lot to the increase in the Low Countries for what we've seen in the last couple of years. And even then, you know, the butterfly hasn't been resident in the Netherlands for a very long time in a serious way. So numbers there are dependent on numbers elsewhere. And we kind of sit maybe at the end of a long conveyor belt for large tortoiseshells in the UK. And what happens here will depend on what happens in lots of other places. So kind of understanding that and being able to predict it will require like really joined up thinking, integrating, you know, data from lots of different countries and thinking at a very large scale, almost like with the painted lady that we saw earlier. So, you know, in order to do that, that really, as Constanti said, for the painted lady, requires lots of data and to get that knowledge. And so I would urge people that see large tortoiseshells to submit their records and to get out and look for larvae, and, you know, and help improve our understanding of this famously elusive butterfly. To kind of illustrate the importance of that, I've combed social media and stuff for records of large tortoiseshells, and also have the ones that Butterfly Conservation holds. And you can see that ones on social media actually that don't make it to Butterfly Conservation represent quite a significant portion of reported sightings. So, you know, if you're twitching a large tortoiseshell and there's lots of other people there, don't assume that they'll submit the records, and make sure to do it yourself, because it's so valuable with this mysterious butterfly. Cool. So on that recording note, I'll leave it there for today. And all that remains is to say thank you very much to everyone that's helped with large tortoiseshell things. It's been a real community effort. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Will. That's fascinating, and well done on all your detective work, both in the field and with the data. Really exciting stuff. And let's hope it's more than just a transitory peak in a sort of pan-European boom for that species, and that it really does come home permanently to the UK. Right, I'm going to wrap us up though, because we're well over our time. But so thanks again to all the speakers, to Constanti and Jen and Will for this afternoon, and everyone for the second part of the meeting, and for everyone who contributed earlier on as well. Particular thanks to the two Zoe Peterson, Zoe Randall, who organised the meeting. To all the speakers, as I said, and of course to all of the volunteers and staff across the UK who work on gathering all this fantastic gathering and then using all this fantastic recording and monitoring data. So we will leave it there, and yes, well, hopefully next year we might be able to meet in person as well as online. Meantime, enjoy the lovely sunny weather. Hopefully it's sunny where you are, and get out there and record some spring butterflies. You never know what you might see, as Will has just shown us. Okay, goodbye everyone. Thanks for coming.